In the middle of a battlefield blanketed in white snow, a lone figure stood towering over heaps of corpses, an intense killing aura radiating from his body. Without turning around, he coldly addressed the one who had just appeared behind him. The old man glanced sideways and asked why he was there when he should have been leading the conquering army in the east. As lowered his head, clenched his fist tightly, and through gritted teeth replied that he had come to defeat him. At that open declaration of war, the man he called father curled his lips in disdain. His reddish eyes remained utterly calm as he slowly drew a bloodstained sword, with a strained voice, as accused him of having planned to use his army as bait from the very beginning and shouted, asking if he was wrong. Father, he cried. The man admitted it without hesitation, his tone indifferent and mocking, saying that such was the purpose of those without wings. Then he sneered, isn't that right, my foolish son? Each bitter word pierced like a dagger through As's heart, igniting the fury within Usha Elmine. Of the Elmine family, the greatest lineage of war gods on the continent, sworn to protect the royal family with their blades, the head of the house, Recap MANHUA, was the only man in the nation who possessed that supreme power. As remembered how this powerful man had once saved his life when he was dying in a blizzard. To repay that debt, he had agreed to do whatever was asked of him, throwing himself into bloody wars without hesitation. Yet his childhood had been nothing but a chain of humiliation and contempt. His brothers constantly mocked him, reminding him that someone without wings like him had no right to hold his head high. For the seal of wings on one's back was the source of magical power. The more wings one bore, the greater one's strength. And so, as the only one in the ducal house unable to use magic, was branded wingless. Despite everything, he devoted himself tirelessly to mastering the sword, turning his body into his only weapon. He always believed that one day his relentless dedication would be acknowledged. In the end, through his own merit, he gained loyal companions who fought at his side, hidden behind a tree, his sharp gaze alert as if sensing a bad omen. He realized too late what was happening. Horror struck him as he saw that the entire army had fallen into a carefully prepared ambush. Painful memories flooded back as he screamed in desperation, demanding to know if this was the reward for his loyalty to the father he had trusted so completely. The only answer was an icy stare. Radric smiled with scorn and asked what an instrument could possibly expect, cruelly declaring that his purpose had been fulfilled and ordering him to disappear. Those words stabbed like 1,000 blades, feeding the hatred blazing in As's eyes. Overwhelmed by rage, he charged forward like a madman, raising his sword and shouting, Father. He had trusted him, only to realize how foolish he had been as he unleashed a spinning slash with all his strength against the man who had betrayed him. The sharp blade grazed Radric's neck, drawing a line of blood that, for the first time, caused his expression to shift. But in the next instant, glowing red magical chains erupted from nowhere and bound him in place. His own brothers had attacked him. Even while chained, he swung his sword wildly, cutting down his attackers in his fury. He cried out in pain as the magical chains tightened, blood spilling from the corner of his mouth. Yet his will to fight would not fade. One of his brothers smirked mockingly and asked if he still did not understand a wingless would always remain a wingless. The three of them, father and son, stood there arrogantly, looking down at him collapsed in the snow. Another brother sneered that crawling on the ground was exactly where he belonged, pressing his hand into the freezing snow, as lifted his trembling voice and asked that if they were going to discard him anyway, why had they taken him in at all? Radric bent down and coldly told him to stop deceiving himself. He had never needed him from the beginning. He roughly grabbed As's hair, yanking his head up to force him to meet his contemptuous gaze, then leaned closer to reveal the terrible truth. What he had truly needed was the power of the 7 wings sleeping within As's body. As's eyes widened in shock as he repeated in disbelief, 7 wings. Radric's cruel smile deepened as he added coldly that his mother had been very useful. He boasted shamelessly that she had borne him only as the seed he required for his own benefit. The last thing as remembered was himself screaming desperately, demanding answers from Radric as cold blades pierced through his body. His consciousness slowly faded, leaving only a bone-chilling cold as his hand sank into the snow. In that final moment, he wondered in despair if this was truly the end of his fate. If so, what meaning had his entire life held? Suddenly, a pale and gentle warmth enveloped him, and for a fleeting second he thought he had reached the afterlife until he realized it was snow. He felt someone holding him in their arms, a foreign warmth that was strangely tender. His eyes flew open wide. No, this was not a dream. It was reality. Confused, he wondered where he was as he lay beneath falling snow. And then horror struck when he noticed the smallness of his body. Staring at his tiny hands, he questioned whether they were truly his. They were not merely similar, they were the hands of a newborn child, and he was being cradled in someone's arms. He looked at the woman holding him and saw that she appeared to have just breathed her last, wondering if she was already dead. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice echoed in his mind, commanding him to seek her. In a vision, he saw knights galloping through the snowstorm, declaring that she could not have gone far. One of them shouted that by order of Duke Radric, they must recover the child she had taken at any cost. The vision vanished, leaving us stunned and unable to comprehend what had just happened. He remained there, overwhelmed as the snow continued to fall. He froze when he remembered the name that had been spoken Duke Radric. Horror dawned on him as he realized that the ones searching for the newborn were, in truth, searching for him. The memory of being found on a night of raging snowstorm resurfaced, and a wild suspicion took root in his mind. Had he returned to the past? He tried to push the thought away when strange flashes of light flickered before his eyes, interrupting his reflection. Though he still could not fully believe it, he chose to set aside the question for now and focus on the immediate danger. One thing was certain: if he remained there, he would once again fall into the hands of the cruel Duke. With the will of a seasoned warrior, he forced his fragile newborn body to crawl out of the cold arms of the woman who had already lost her warmth. Suddenly, a surge of golden energy burst from within him, driving his desperate resolve to flee as far as possible. The heat from his tiny hands melted the thick snow wherever he touched it. Yet the body of a newborn soon reached its limit. He collapsed into the snow, feeling his breathing grow heavier and more strained. Amid the biting cold, his limbs burned as if consumed by fire. A long trail of melted water marked his path across the white ground, but he could barely drag himself any farther. Even so, his eyes shone with unyielding determination. No matter what, he swore he would survive. The image of his ruthless father turning his back on him resurfaced, planting a vow of vengeance deep in his heart. Clenching his teeth, pouring every ounce of hatred into his glowing hands, he whispered to himself, "Radric, I swear." With the last of his strength, the tiny newborn crawled with astonishing persistence, carving a long mark across the snow until, completely exhausted, he collapsed at the feet of a figure who had just appeared. A little girl pointed excitedly at the motionless child and called out to her father in delight. The man known as Viscount Fred could not hide his shock at the sight before him. Gently, he picked up the baby, wondering how such a child could possibly have ended up in a place like this. Feeling the safety and warmth of the man's embrace, the child drifted into sleep. Viscount Fred stared in astonishment at the strange newborn in his arms. His eyes traced the long trail left behind in the snow, and he could scarcely believe that a baby could have traveled such a distance alone. Looking down at the sleeping child, he could not help but wonder about the boy's true identity. When he awoke again, he found himself in a warm room, far removed from the raging storm outside. Still drowsy, he questioned where he was, and suddenly an illusion appeared before him, a boy with hair as red as fire, reaching out his hand as if trying to take him away. Just as abruptly, a gentle pinch on his cheek pulled him out of the vision. For charming little girls surrounded him. One of them excitedly announced to the eldest that the baby had awakened, while the older sister scolded the others not to ruin the baby's pretty nose. The veteran warrior, now trapped in the helpless body of an infant, could do nothing as he found himself surrounded and handled by four lively girls. Unable to understand what was happening, he struggled helplessly in their midst. Fortunately, the eldest sister, a girl with platinum hair, rescued him from the other's clutches. Even so, he curled up in her lap with suspicion in his eyes. Suddenly, with the will of an adult trapped inside, he tried to stand and free himself from the girl's arms, but his fragile newborn body betrayed him at once, and he fell face first onto the floor, shocking everyone in the room. One of the girls cried out in alarm, unable to comprehend what on earth was going on. Startled and frustrated, Az began crawling frantically, not understanding why the girls were chasing after him while shouting for him to stop. The comical pursuit ended only when his tiny body could no longer endure the effort, and he was finally caught. Viscount Fred managed to scoop him up just in time and remarked in astonishment that he truly was a strange child, falling from the sky like that. Az's eyes widened. He froze the moment he recognized the man holding him. This was Viscount Fred, the brother of Duke Radric. Shocked, he looked around at his surroundings. Could this place be another residence of the Elmine family? Igra Elmine, lord of the Viscount's house and head of a lesser branch of the Elmine family, had once stood alongside his brother Radric. They were known as the Twin Wings, the two right hands entrusted with protecting the royal family. Yet in the memories as carried from his previous life, Viscount Ifrit had died tragically during a civil war, bringing about the downfall of his entire house. Seeing the Viscount alive and standing before him, Az could finally be certain he truly had returned to the past. Even so, he could not help but clutch his head at the bitter irony. In trying to escape the Duke's household, he had fallen straight into the hands of his own brother. Meanwhile, the Viscountess, who now held him gently, speculated that perhaps the child's magic had gone out of control and caused him to fly. Convinced that he was no ordinary baby, she looked at him with tender eyes and a warm smile so different from the cruelty he remembered. She hugged him softly, comforting him and telling him that he must have been very frightened, but that everything would be all right now. For the first time in both of his lives, Az felt the warmth of a mother's embrace. It left him stunned and speechless. From a short distance away, Viscount Fred smiled in quiet satisfaction as he watched the scene. He stepped closer and declared that this child harbored extraordinary power, and that the mark on his body was the clearest proof. As the Viscount lifted the baby's sleeve before a mirror, a bright red mark came into view. The Viscountess gasped in horror. "Is this the 7 wings?" she whispered. Az himself went rigid, unable to understand why the mark of the 7 wings had appeared on his body. At that very moment, Fragments of dreadful memories from his previous life surged back like crashing waves. He awoke fully to the truth. Radric's words echoed. In his mind, what he had needed was the power of the 7 wings hidden within his body. From the very beginning, he had never intended to raise him as a son. He had taken him in for one purpose only, to steal the 7 wings. And yet he had dared to call him wingless, after stripping him of his, after having his own wings torn away in his previous life. Indignation erupted in As's heart like a blazing fire. Back in the present, noticing the sudden change in his expression, the Viscountess spoke with concern and then turned to her husband to ask what he intended to do with the child. Hearing this, As felt inwardly that the situation was truly dangerous. He could not allow this power to fall into the hands of the Elmine family again. He needed it for himself, needed it to take revenge on that man. Then, without hesitation, Viscount Fred made a decision. He declared that he would adopt the child. As lifted his gaze in shock, stunned by such an unexpected and unbelievable statement, the Viscount slowly extended his hand, and there was not the slightest trace of malice in his eyes. He gently patted the boy's head and said that this child was still a little bird who could not yet fly on his own, and that he would raise him until the day he could spread his wings and soar freely. Something complex flickered in As's glassy eyes and quietly faded. This kind of kindness, it was something he had never experienced before. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the room. One of the Viscount's daughters, who had been secretly eavesdropping outside the door, had fallen over. The Viscount turned sharply and sternly, asked if two of his daughters had been listening in, but it turned out not to be two. It was all four sisters, who had been stacked in a clumsy pile after collapsing on top of one another. The eldest daughter stood up awkwardly, scratching her head and explaining that they had simply been too worried about the baby. Amid this warm family atmosphere, a red-haired girl looked curiously at her mother. Pointing at the newborn in her arms, she asked excitedly what his name would be. The Viscountess smiled gently, gazing tenderly at the child, lifting him slightly under the soft glow of the moonlight. She gave him the name Aster, saying that it meant a new star had been born into their family. Time passed swiftly. 10 years later, within a splendid mansion, Viscount Fred, now visibly older, arrived, and was greeted by a soldier's respectful bow. Behind him, a nimble young attendant stepped forward to open the door of a luxurious carriage. It was Aster. The once helpless infant had grown into a handsome and elegant young man as he descended from the vehicle. Turning politely, he extended his hand to help a red-haired girl step down, gently reminding Miss Alphen to be careful. The young lady smiled brightly and thanked Aster, and for a brief moment, her mischievous expression from childhood resurfaced in his memory. Aster watched his sister Alphen's back with quiet affection. In his gaze shone maturity and confidence. Together, they walked toward the venue of an important event. They were heading to the Swordballland annual gathering hosted by the Ducal House of Elmine for noble knight families. On the surface, it was an occasion meant to strengthen ties among the nobility, but in truth it was also a ruthless arena of rivalry between houses. Each family would present the strength of their young swordsmen, who carried the honor of their entire lineage upon their shoulders. The moment Aster and Alphen entered the Grand Hall, every gaze turned toward them. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Murmurs and mocking comments began to rise. Voices laced with subtle disdain as they spoke of the house of the Viscount had come only to humiliate itself, having adopted a brat of unknown origin instead of producing a proper heir. Among the crowd, hostile and malicious glances questioned just how far the Viscount's family intended to tarnish the reputation of the Elmine name. Aster stood still, his gaze fixed on the imposing castle before him, lost in thought. Noticing his silence, Alphen squeezed his hand anxiously and told him not to pay attention to those cruel whispers. She clenched her teeth and said firmly that in a place like this, whoever showed weakness would be crushed first. Aster remained quiet. Calmly, he surveyed the hostility surrounding. Then, without the slightest change in expression, behind him, Viscount Fred spoke in a low, steady voice, explaining that this was the current standing of their house. Standing before the majestic ducal castle, he said he wanted Aster to see this harsh reality with his own eyes. Then he turned toward his son and asked whether he felt disappointed. Aster turned slightly. A confident and faintly defiant smile curved his lips as he replied, "Not at all, father. This coldness suits me perfectly." Hearing his son's firm answer, Viscount Fred burst into proud laughter, clearly at ease. Suddenly, painful memories from Aster's previous life flooded back himself as the shame of House Elmine. Defeated in humiliation, this very place had been the stage of his worst social disgrace, a hall filled with bitter memories. But now, having regained the 7 wings, everything was different. A flame of determination burned in his golden eyes, signaling that revenge was about to begin. Standing beside his father and his sister Alphen, Aster lifted his gaze toward the towering ducal castle, a structure heavy with the weight of his past. From above, the two half-brothers of his former life looked down at him with arrogance and contempt, despite their scrutinizing stares. Aster's expression remained perfectly composed. Beneath his fringe lay an extraordinary calm. Now was the time to step forward with dignity and face everything. Confidence gleamed in Aster's eyes as he thought silently to himself, "Let's make a spectacular entrance." Inside the Grand Hall, an intense fencing competition was unfolding at the central stage. capturing the full attention of the gathered nobles. In an era where knights reigned supreme, they were expected to embody both overwhelming power and noble grandeur. Power was demonstrated through masterful swordsmanship, while grandeur stemmed from the fame and standing of one's house. At the center of the hall, two young swordsmen clashed in a fierce duel, their movements brimming with explosive energy. They charged across the arena toward one another, closing the distance in an instant for a decisive collision. What followed was the very embodiment of strength and splendor, the manifestation of magical energy. With a single precise strike, one combatant shattered his opponent's sword into pieces. The defeated youth's face froze in disbelief just before he collapsed. The victor rose proudly, revealing the absolute symbol of his family's lineage, the wing emblem. On the back of his hand, the emblem of two wings glowed with a bluish light, irrefutable proof of his power. From the balcony above, Aster watched the scene in silence, his gaze steady and unreadable. Perfect composure, thinking to himself that this place was just as intimidating as it had always been. No wonder his other sisters, Friend and Free, had firmly refused to come to such a hostile environment, ignoring the mocking stares that he recognized all too well from his past life. Aster's resolve hardened like steel. A bitter memory continued to haunt him, the image of his humiliating defeat in this very hall. Noticing that his gaze had drifted far away, Alfin called his name with genuine concern. She gently asked if he was nervous, since after all, this was his first sword ball. Aster, however, smiled with unusual confidence and replied that he was not nervous at all. If anything, he felt nostalgic. His strange answer left Alfin completely confused, unable to understand what he meant. At that moment, Viscount Fred excused himself, saying he needed to attend a conference, and entrusted Aster with taking care of Alfin. Indignant, Alfin protested, reminding her father that she was 1 year older. Aster teased her lightly, saying she was far too clumsy. The Viscount placed a hand on Aster's shoulder and advised him to take advantage of the opportunity to make connections, since there were many young nobles his age present. Then, lowering his voice, he warned him seriously not to let anyone discover the truth about the 7 wings. As the Viscount walked away, Aster remained deep in thought, weighing his adoptive father's warning. Yet the looks directed at him from every corner of the hall were filled with barely concealed hostility. He thought wryly that in such an openly unfriendly atmosphere, forming connections as his father suggested would be nearly impossible. But instead of shrinking back, a cold determination settled into his golden eyes. When Alfin saw him walking forward with firm steps, she asked anxiously where he was going. Without even turning to look at her, he answered calmly, to make friends. With steady strides, Aster descended the grand staircase and headed straight toward a group of young nobles chatting on a sofa, the red-haired youth leading. The group looked at him with disdain and demanded to know who he was. Aster bowed slightly, wearing a confident smile, and said it was a pleasure to meet him. Brother Darius. He then introduced himself formally as Aster Elmine, declaring that he was his younger brother. Darius stared at him in astonishment. Casually, Aster added that he had seen him from outside and thought he would stop by to greet him. Another young man, Leo, leaned toward Darius and explained that this was the adopted boy the Viscount's house had taken in. Darius burst into manic laughter, now understanding why this brat had the audacity to call himself an Elmine. At that instant, memories of his past death flooded Aster's mind. He recognized them clearly: Darius and Gryo, the 2 heirs of House Elmine, the very ones who had killed him. In his previous life, they had cast long shadows over his heart, seeming terrifying beyond measure. But now, as he looked at them under the bright lights of the hall, they appeared to be nothing more than a group of children playing at power. Sensing the tension, Alfin quickly grabbed Aster by the arm and called his name in concern. She tried to pull him away, insisting that he had already greeted them, and it was time to return. But Darius's mocking voice stopped her, addressing her with an unwanted familiarity. With a sneer, he asked whether she wasn't hiding behind her father again today, and then arrogantly ordered them to come closer and entertain him, declaring it an order from the main house. Alfin froze, her back stiff as she stood facing away from them. Her body trembled with tension, her eyes burning with fury at the humiliating command. She flatly refused, stating firmly that there was no master-servant relationship between the main house and their branch family. Just as she was about to step forward and act, Aster swiftly caught her wrist, stopping her from making a reckless move. Holding her firmly, he said calmly that he had not finished speaking yet. His composed profile stood in sharp contrast to the charged atmosphere, concealing his true intentions beneath a mask of serenity. Seeing this, Darius's lips twisted into a sadistic grin as he decided to pour more oil onto the fire. He began mocking her openly, reminding everyone that her father, though a knight, had failed to protect the king, and that as punishment, his own younger brother had cut off his arm. Each word struck Alfin like a lash, forcing her to lower her head in pain and humiliation. Darius continued his cruel speech, saying how grateful he was that he did not carry the blood of such a loser in his veins. Unable to endure it any longer, Alfin erupted in fury, demanding that he retract his words. With an angry shout, she declared that she would not allow him to insult her father, and lunged forward, landing a powerful punch squarely against Darius's jaw. Yet even as she lowered her head, Darius continued his verbal assault, mocking that in her family only, useless daughters were born girls who could not inherit a title and that her father must surely be disappointed. With a vicious smile, he lifted his wine glass and coldly reminded her that this was not a dance floor. Then he flung the wine at her, staining her dress, and cruelly advised her to wear rags next time so she would not have to worry about getting soaked. At that very moment, Aster stepped forward. On his way here, he had been wondering to himself whether, upon seeing their faces again, he would feel nothing at all, no anger, no resentment. With a smooth and sudden motion, he snatched a bottle of wine from a startled noble nearby. But when he saw his sister standing there, humiliated, her eyes brimming with tears, her cheek bruised and bleeding, he felt a strange relief. So he could still feel anger. Calmly, he called out Darius's name and tossed the wine bottle into the air with a provocative flick of his wrist. Just as the bottle was about to smash against Darius's head, it halted midair, suspended by an invisible force. Aster looked at him with open contempt and declared that they were still the same pieces of trash as ever. With a subtle movement of his hand, the suspended bottle turned into a weapon ready to strike. In the next instant, it shattered, drenching the utterly stunned Darius in red wine from head to toe. Aster then stood upright with chilling composure over the fallen bodies of the nobles, his sword dripping with blood, while Griot screamed his brother's name in desperation, wiping a drop of liquid from his lip. Aster remarked casually that it was only grape juice. With a twisted, contemptuous smile, he added that it was the perfect drink for noble babies like them. They did not believe him. A memory from 3 years ago suddenly crashed into his mind, an explosion of golden energy, and his father's voice shouting at him to control it. Amid the chaos, one sister held another unconscious in her arms, crying through tears and asking if he was trying to kill them, begging him to hold on. Alphen, his eldest sister, had pleaded in terror for him to control himself as spirals of dark and golden power coiled around him. He remembered the power of the 7 wings unleashing a force so dangerous that even he barely understood it. The image of his father, desk and freed, appeared in his thoughts, his face lined with worry as he questioned whether Aster could ever master such power. Aster remembered his own struggle, the overwhelming energy tearing through his body, and his father's voice wondering if either of them could endure it. Meanwhile, an attendant burst into the conference hall shouting that something terrible had happened. Viscount Fred, interrupted, demanded sternly what could be so urgent in the middle of such an important meeting. The attendant reported in panic that the children of the main house and the Elmine branch family were engaged in a duel. The Viscount and his brother, Duke Aderic, exchanged a tense glance. Instantly, the Viscount leapt to his feet and rushed from the hall, his cape billowing behind him. When he reached the balcony, he found a distressed Alphen running toward him, crying out, "Father." He urgently asked what had happened. A broad man with a shark-like smile pointed toward the arena below, commenting with excitement that a fight between the great Elmine brothers was underway, something not seen every day. The Viscount and Alphen leaned over to see Aster facing Darius alone. The man added that depending on how this ended, the consequences could be enormous, a thought that visibly unsettled the surrounding nobles. With a sinister grin, the red-eyed man predicted that this dance of swords was about to turn ugly. In the arena, Darius, enraged, unleashed his power, shouting that some fool had dared to provoke the Duke's house. He called Aster nothing more than a stray dog who did not understand the difference in power between them. The emblem of 4 wings on his hand glowed with blue light, and the crowd murmured in awe that, as expected, the Duke's son stood on an entirely different level, pressing the tip of his sword close to Aster's face. Darius smirked and demanded that he show his own wing emblem, or was he too ashamed to reveal it after seeing Darius's? But Aster replied with unsettling calm that Darius was right, boasting about a mere pattern was indeed embarrassing. With a faint half-smile playing on his lips, he stood unmoved before him. With a faint smile, Aster added that he could never do something so vulgar. A vein throbbed violently on Darius's forehead, his face flushing red as humiliation burned through him at Aster's unexpected insolence. Aster calmly set his terms. If he won, Darius would apologize to his sister. Darius accepted at once, countering that if he won, Aster would become his dog, shouting that he would work him to the bone. Without another word, Darius lunged forward with scything speed. Their swords collided in a shower of golden sparks, the ringing clash echoing through the arena and marking the beginning of a duel that was clearly more than a mere display. Aster shifted into a firm combat stance, his sword steady in his grip as an aura of dust and swirling wind gathered around him, his golden eyes sharpened with focus, his hand tightening around the hilt in preparation for the coming assault. Darius, wearing a smile of superiority, unleashed his own energy and declared that this was the power of someone who actually possessed an emblem. With a fierce shout, he launched a barrage of swift, crushing slashes that tore through the air, each strike carving a gust of cutting wind in its wake. From the balcony, Alphen screamed Aster's name, her face pale with terror at the ferocity of the attack. The broad man beside her merely smirked and remarked that young Master Darius's swordsmanship was still immature. Even so, Darius's overwhelming magic more than compensated for any technical flaws. A violent surge of power erupted from him, proving the advantage of those who bore winged emblems. In his arrogance, Darius thought that if one wing contained the magic of a candle, then his four wings were a true explosion. Flames burst outward in a relentless rain of blazing strikes. He mocked Aster as he pressed him back, asking what had become of the boldness he had shown earlier. Unshaken by the onslaught, Aster met the storm of attacks with a steel-eyed calm, blocking each strike with precise movements. Darius sneered, taunting him. Did he not want to force an apology after all? Or had it all been empty words? With a furious roar, Darius demanded that Aster show his power and poured every ounce of energy into a final, devastating blow. From the stands, a mustached noble smiled smugly and declared the match decided. But Aster answered by releasing his own aura. His sword shone with a pure, white radiance. The two forces collided in a massive explosion of red and gold energy, a breathtaking spectacle of raw magic and brute strength. Darius's face twisted into disbelief. Unable to comprehend how his ultimate strike had been stopped, Aster offered him a half-smile and said simply that he talked too much. With a smooth, elegant motion, he knocked Darius's blade aside and delivered a spinning kick that sent him flying across the arena. Aster landed lightly, his body now wrapped in tendrils of golden energy, displaying a level of control Darius could never hope to match. For 10 long years in the Viscount's household, he had trained to master his magic, patiently waiting for the day he could take his revenge. That day had finally come. With an upward slash, Aster unleashed a brilliant surge of power that split the air itself. Golden light roaring skyward as the arena trembled beneath the force of his strike. A golden blaze of power erupted from Aster's blade. The force of the impact hurled Darius backward. Completely unable to withstand the charge, he crashed down awkwardly, his knees striking the ground with a sickening crack as he struggled to rise. From a distance, his brother Gria watched in disbelief, stammering that Darius was being pushed back, utterly overwhelmed by the green and gold energy wrapping around him. Darius's face twisted in shock, his mind barely able to grasp what was happening. He shouted in outrage that he had four wings. Aster remained unmoved, his expression cold and calculating, as golden energy danced along the edge of his sword. With one swift, decisive motion, he condensed his power into a single point. The noble spectators gasped in shock. One whispered aloud whether Aster could truly win this, while another pointed out that Darius was being completely dominated. Then a final explosion of golden energy burst from Aster's blade, sealing the duel's outcome. Murmurs of astonishment rippled through the crowd. The Elmine family still possessed someone with such power among them, but Aster's golden aura intensified further. Dark tendrils began to seep from his body as his power surged to a terrifying degree. From the balcony, Deskin Halford frowned deeply, muttering that this was bad. Darius's face contorted in pain, and, fury as the crushing pressure of Aster's power bore down on him, a traumatic memory from his past life struck him without warning. The image of one of his brothers severing his arm with a deranged smile. The mad laughter echoed in his ears, a reminder of the cruelty he had endured. Back in the present, dark and golden energy exploded outward from Aster, his face shadowed by uncontrollable rage. Trapped within the vortex of power, Darius screamed curses as he desperately tried to resist the overwhelming force. From above, Alphen cried out in panic, begging Aster to stop. But it was too late. The power of the seven wings fully unleashed, detonating in a blinding explosion that carved a massive crater into the center of the arena. When the dust finally settled, the broad man stood with his arms crossed, his expression grave. Aster's sword was embedded in the ground mere inches from Darius's terrified face. It had stopped just in time. Seated on the ground, utterly defeated, Darius listened as Aster calmly returned his own cruel words. With an icy gaze, Aster advised him that next time he should wear rags so he would not have to worry about getting wet. Cousin, Aster turned away, sheathing his sword with a quiet confidence. He declared to himself that he was no longer the wingless failure everyone once knew. From the balcony, Alphen watched him with a mixture of relief and awe, her heart still pounding. Aster allowed himself a faint smile, knowing that his sister was safe for now. That was enough to steady his mind. Suddenly, his golden eye flickered with a flash of red. He sensed a new presence. A figure wrapped in dark crimson energy descended from the ceiling and landed heavily in the center of the hall. Aster's gaze sharpened at once, recognizing the ominous figure who had made such a dramatic entrance. At the top of the grand staircase stood an imposing man, the Duke Radric. His presence filled the hall with suffocating tension. One word slipped from Aster's lips, heavy with hatred and resolve. Radric. The spectators were still murmuring in disbelief, unable to comprehend that the Viscount's youngest son had just defeated the third son of the main house. But the situation had turned grave. After such public humiliation, there was no way the main house would remain idle. The towering figure of Duke Rarwelmain, the eighth leader of the main house, descended the stairs slowly. Darius, still on the ground, looked up at him with a mixture of fear and relief, as though his father's arrival meant salvation. Aster did not move. His eyes locked onto the man who embodied all his pain and his thirst for revenge. The Duke's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene. Aster felt a suffocating aura of power and hostility emanating from him, the same man who had betrayed and killed him in his previous life. Despite the crushing pressure in the hall, Darius began to crawl forward, his body trembling from humiliation. He clutched at his father's leg, pointing at Aster with a face twisted by hatred. He called him a mangy dog who dared challenge the main house, and begged his father to use his power to put him in his place, instead of help. Roderick's hand slammed down onto the ground directly over his son's. A scream of agony tore from Darius's throat as his bones cracked under the immense pressure. His hand crushed beneath his father's palm. The young nobles stared in horror and confusion, unable to understand the Duke's brutality. Griot's face drained of color as he witnessed the cruelty of his own father. Roderick looked down at his defeated son with utter contempt and asked why he was smiling like an idiot after dragging the family's name through the mud. From the balcony, Deskin Halfred shouted, pleading with Roderick to stop, but the Duke ignored him coldly. He declared that someone who could not even avenge himself had no right to wield a sword. Raising his hand as if to deliver the finishing blow, the grand hall fell into tense silence, the air thick with anticipation. On the ground, Darius could only tremble, his face a mixture of humiliation and terror. Yet the fiercest fury burned in Duke Roderick's crimson eyes as they shifted to the one who had just arrived at the center of it all. He pointed his sword directly at Aster and demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Aster did not flinch. Calmly, he answered that his cousin had not yet apologized to his sister. Sister, Aster finished calmly. Then, with astonishing boldness, he looked at his uncle and asked whether the punishment could be reserved until after the apology was given. Roderick, wrapped in a menacing purple aura, let out a mocking laugh. He asked if being a stray orphan, taken in by a Freedid, had made him believe he was truly part of the Elmine family. Aster did not waver. He declared firmly that he was the Viscount's son, and that his father had taught him thoroughly about the pride of a knight and the weight of inheriting a house's name even without sharing its blood. The Duke fell silent for a moment, his expression hardening as he processed the boy's defiant words. Then, flames erupted around him as he accused Aster of unnecessarily tarnishing the reputation of the main house, the very pride that stood at the peak of its 12,000 knights. From the balcony, the broad man remarked that they should understand that well, while a young man with light blue hair added with a faint smile that this could hardly be dismissed as a mere children's quarrel. Deskin Halfrey's voice rang out gravely, reminding them that his father had once offered an arm as the price for disloyalty. Now the edge of Duke Roderick's sword pressed coldly against Aster's throat. He demanded to know what Aster would offer in exchange. With all due respect, Aster began evenly, explaining that this had not been a sibling scuffle, but a legitimate duel, and that he had simply answered insults against his house with his blade. The Duke's eyes burned with silent fury at the young boy's bold yet logical response. Aster met his gaze without hesitation, repeating the Duke's own harsh words that one who cannot avenge himself has no right to wield a sword, and declared that he had no intention of yielding even a single finger. From above, Alphen trembled as she watched, while the broad man beside her gently patted her head in an attempt to calm her. The blue-haired youth chuckled under his breath in disbelief, remarking that Aster was only 10 years old. This had to be some kind of joke. Roderick remained silent for a long moment, his red eye glowing with dangerous intensity. At last, he drew his own sword and said simply that he understood. In a cold, commanding tone, he ordered Aster to draw his blade. Aster hesitated for a fraction of a second, not expecting the Duke himself to intervene. Before he could fully react, the ground beneath him shattered and an invisible force hurled him into the air. The tip of the Duke's sword slammed into the ground where Aster had stood a heartbeat earlier, unleashing a devastating shockwave. Alphen choked back a scream, her eyes wide with terror at the overwhelming power on display. Deskin Halfrey shouted his brother's name, his face twisted with rage at what he saw as a cowardly strike. Leaping from the balcony, he placed himself between the Duke and Aster, his own sword sweeping in a brilliant arc of blue light. The blades of the two brothers collided in an eruption of sparks and force. A duel between the leaders of the two houses had begun at last. The shockwaves from their clash thundered through the great hall, making clear the immense gulf in power. The Viscount landed beside Aster and urgently asked if he was all right. In front of them, a massive pillar of stone rose from the ground, blocking the Duke's path. The Viscount's face filled with surprise and concern at the defensive technique. Aster pushed himself to his feet with difficulty. His body was bruised, blood trailing down from his forehead, but his spirit remained unbroken. His eyes burned brighter than before, a fierce blend of pain, fury, and unshakable resolve. Duke Adaric watched the scene unfold with a faint, superior smile, seemingly satisfied with how events had turned. Without another word, he turned and began walking back toward the stairs, abandoning the confrontation. With an agile leap, he landed on the balcony beside his defeated son, leaving behind a hall scarred by destruction. The Viscount watched him go, then placed a protective hand on Aster's shoulder. Standing firmly at his side amid the lingering tremors of power, the Viscount stood shaken, holding the injured Aster in his arms and calling his name with a voice thick with worry. Despite the blood and bruises, Aster managed a satisfied smile and assured his father that he had properly upheld his promise and everything else that mattered. Relief and pride blended in the Viscount's expression as he told his son he had been magnificent. Meanwhile, Duke Roderick withdrew with his defeated son, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. The broad man approached the Duke with a faint smile, remarking that his reaction had been rather childish. Roderick paused long, enough to explain coldly to his humiliated son that, if he had allowed the boy to say whatever he pleased, the reputation of the main house would have been completely ruined. What he had done, he claimed, was a reasonable compromise. Away from the confrontation, nobles murmured in amazement. A promising newcomer had boldly challenged the great Duke Roderick himself and survived, emerging as a rising star. The mustached noble admitted that while the thought of the Elmine family dividing made him uneasy, the boy could not have asked for a better social debut. In the shadows, Duke Aderic watched with a somber gaze, aware that an age of upheaval was drawing near, a storm powerful enough to split the world itself. Back with his family, Aster was met with a worried embrace from Alphen, while his father supported him proudly. Blood stained his face, but a victorious smile lingered there. Aster was left speechless. The scene shifted to the training arena of the Viscount House of Elmhine. Several knights stood watch as a training session unfolded. Two of them sparred with wooden swords. With an easy smile, the knight praised his master's performance, calling it splendid. The one he praised was Aster. The surrounding knights murmured among themselves, remarking that Aster's swordsmanship was terrifying for someone of his age. They noted that his training had grown even more intense. Since the sword dance assembly, one knight recalled how Aster had defeated the third son of Elmhine family, and the group could not hide their satisfaction. The main family had looked down on the Viscount house for years, and seeing one of their own stand tall against them felt deeply refreshing. As Aster continued defeating opponent after opponent, his thoughts drifted inward. At the sword dance assembly, he had shown enough power and presence to silence those who called his family a disgrace to House Elmhine. Yet he knew the real hurdles still lay ahead, the Elmhine main house. He wished he could have tested himself further on that stage against more opponents. Even now he understood that at his current level, he stood no chance of defeating Roderick Elmhine. To Aster, a winged crest was nothing more than an indicator of magical potential. Inborn magic was a useless treasure if one could not fully master it, and even now he could not draw out the full power of the 7 wings. If only he did not have to fear losing control going berserk, he could truly test the limits of that power. With a final exchange, Aster defeated the last knight standing. Several knights lay on the ground. Aster's gaze was sharp and determined, as he asked calmly if anyone else wished to step forward. Before anyone could answer, a familiar voice interrupted. Alphen appeared, remarking that he was pushing himself to hard again. She asked whether he even knew what rest was and told him that their father was calling for him. Aster agreed at once and said he would go see their father. As he walked, he noticed his sister's outfit and commented on it. Alphen turned confused, not understanding what he meant at first. Aster explained that it was rare to see her wearing that outfit since she used to dislike it for not being cute. She replied that balance was important. Watching Aster train had made her realize she could not remain the same forever either. Her words caught Aster off guard, leaving him momentarily speechless, especially when she raised her training sword toward him with a confident smile. She said that when he returned, they would spend a lot of time together. With a grin, Aster accepted her challenge and asked her politely to go easy on him. Sometime later, Aster arrived at his father's office. When he entered, Viscount Ifrita told him to take a seat. Aster complied, sitting across from his father with a serious expression. Ifrit remarked that 10 years had passed since they had welcomed Aster into the family. He admitted that he had once considered waiting until Aster was older, but decided it was time to move things forward. He placed a small case on the desk. Inside lay a ring. Ifrit revealed that the ring was proof of succession, the symbol of the next head of the Viscount house. He then declared that he wanted Aster to be his successor. Aster froze in shock. Directly and without hesitation, the Viscount told him that he wanted him to inherit the house. The young boy sat stunned as his father explained that, as Aster already knew, their branch of the family stood in a delicate position. Despite everything, they still bore the Elmhine name. As lords of their territory, they had much to protect. With the weight of their lineage pressing upon him, the Viscount stated that the position of the next head of the house could not remain vacant forever. Aster's first concern, however, was his sisters. He asked whether they would agree with such a decision. The Viscount informed him that his older sisters, currently studying at the Knights Academy, would return in 3 days, and he intended to tell everyone then. Aster immediately thought of Marfa and Kudo, powerful, imposing figures in their own right. With a wry smile, he thought that they would not be pleased at all. In particular, Kudo would be furious. His father sighed and explained that Kudo disliked him simply because he had been born male and because he had been blessed with the 7 wings. Hearing that, Aster's expression hardened. With unshakable determination, he declared that he could not accept the proposal. Turning his back slightly, he confessed that he could not even fully control his own magic. He called himself an immature fool who had nearly killed his own sister. In the vast, silent study, he stated that someone like him did not have the confidence to persuade an angry sister, let alone carry the burden of leadership. He refused the honor. The Viscount listened quietly, a faint smile forming on his lips. At last, he broke the silence and admitted that he often wondered whether Aster was truly a child at all. Ignoring the refusal for the moment, he opened a long wooden box. He said he had originally planned to give Aster the ring as a reward for the sword dance, but perhaps this would make him happier instead. When Aster saw what lay inside, his eyes widened in disbelief. He asked in astonishment what it was. The Viscount revealed that it was the magic sword, Grandma blade capable of controlling the power of the 7 wings, the devouring magic sword. Later, in a secluded forest clearing, the Viscount declared that the place would suffice. Aster, puzzled, asked why they had come so far just to test the sword. The Viscount simply replied that it was a precaution. With an ironic smile, he remarked that Aster had a habit of breaking things, recalling the many times his uncontrollable power had caused destruction. He presented Graham properly, explaining that it was a legendary blade passed down only to the firstborn of the Elmine family. He himself had retrieved it from the main house especially for Aster. With a sharp motion, he drew it from its sheath. Aster stared in utter confusion. Was that truly a sword? As he could plainly see, it had no blade. The Viscount smiled and explained that when magic was channeled into it, a crimson, ethereal blade would emerge from the hilt. As he demonstrated, a red spectral edge burst forth, leaving Aster speechless. The sword, he said, completed itself with the wielder's magic, a true blade of power. With a single swing, the Viscount unleashed a massive shockwave that carved a wide path through the forest. Trees split apart as a vortex of wind and debris roared outward, showcasing the weapon's overwhelming might. However, he warned that with mediocre magical power, the sword would drain its wielder dry. It was a devouring blade in every sense. Holding the glowing crimson hilt out to him, the Viscount asked if Aster would try. Without hesitation, Aster grasped it, his hands closing over his father's in a symbolic gesture. The moment his fingers touched the hilt, his own magic arc and golden tendrils intertwined surged forward to meet it. Energy exploded around him in a violent, uncontrollable storm. He felt his magic pour into the sword on its own, an overwhelming sensation that stole his breath. Back at the training grounds, a beam of red light shot skyward, piercing the heavens and leaving everyone staring in shock. One knight gasped and wondered if a comet had fallen, but his companion shouted that it was the opposite. Something had flown up into the sky. Watching from afar, Alphen heard the commotion. Though the description was vague, she recognized the energy instantly. There was no doubt in her mind. It was Aster. In the forest, Aster sank down onto the ground, utterly exhausted yet wearing a smile of pure amazement. He admitted breathlessly that the sword was truly extraordinary. The Viscount looked at his son with a mixture of awe and stern seriousness, telling him that what was truly remarkable was not the blade itself, but the incredible power that resided within him. In a grave voice, he revealed that in the entire vast history of the Elmane family, not a single person had ever possessed a 7-winged emblem. As they moved deeper into the forest, he assured Aster that if he could master that power, he would become a swordsman far superior to 6-winged warriors like himself and even Radric. The image of Radric flashed through Aster's mind, and the thought of surpassing him ignited a blazing fire of determination and vengeance in his golden eyes. However, his father warned him solemnly that such immense power would always breed conflict. As Aster tightened his grip around the hilt of Gran, the Viscount explained that if people discovered he possessed 7 wings, his emblem shining on his back, like a beacon, many would envy him, while others would hate him, like ghostly hands trying to drag him into darkness. Some would attempt to manipulate him through schemes and intrigue, while others, seeing him as a threat, would not hesitate to eliminate him. Reaching out his hand in a gesture of support, the Viscount urged him to master his power, so that when the decisive moment arrived, he would not be left regretting his own helplessness. With firm conviction, he encouraged his adoptive son to grow stronger. Aster took his father's hand, his heart overflowing with gratitude, and silently vowed that he would never again live a miserable life like he had in the past. Looking straight into his father's eyes, he thanked him sincerely and swore that he would master the 7 wings no matter the cost. 3 days later, the Viscount and his wife waited in the grand hall, ready to welcome home their 2 daughters who were returning. 2 young women descended the staircase, one with short red hair and a fierce expression, the other with long white hair and a gentle smile. The red-haired girl proudly announced that Kadriaka had returned. After clearing her throat to regain her composure, she spread her arms wide with a radiant grin, inviting her beloved little sisters to come and embrace her. Instead, the 2 younger girls ran straight to the white-haired sister, Marfa, joyfully welcoming her home. Left standing alone in the middle of the hall, Kudo blinked in confusion, wondering why no one was hugging her. The little girls explained, as they cuddled close to Marfa, that it was because Sister Kudo always messed up their hair. Crossing her arms with an offended expression, Kudo flatly denied the accusation, declaring that she had perfectly mastered the etiquette of a knight and would never behave in such an improper manner. Yet her serious facade crumbled the moment she saw her sister, Alphen. With a joyful shout, she lunged forward and wrapped her in a crushing embrace, nearly suffocating her, asking loudly whether she had been a good girl in her absence. Alphen struggled desperately to free herself from the overwhelming hug. She demanded to know why she was approaching her so roughly, while Kudo continued her overly enthusiastic greeting. Marfa, the white-haired sister, noticed someone was missing and asked where Aster was. The Viscount replied with a mysterious smile, saying simply, "Oh, that boy." At once, Kudo's gaze hardened, her expression shifting from cheerful warmth to cold seriousness. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, a violent pillar of red energy erupted from Aster's sword. The young man struggled desperately to control the overwhelming power, leaping and swinging the blade again and again in an attempt to subdue it. At last he dropped to his knees, exhausted and drenched in sweat, cursing his inability to fully master the weapon, unaware that his sister was already searching for him. A single lock of his hair had turned white from the strain, though he could form a blade with magic. Suppressing the sword's true power drained everything he had. The forest clearing was scarred with craters, clear evidence of his struggle to control the sword Graham. As he wondered how his father managed to wield it so effortlessly, suddenly a familiar voice pulled him from his thoughts, teasing that she could see he was going all out again. Startled, Aster turned and greeted his sister Kudo, asking when she had returned. With a playful but sharp smile, she scolded him for not even coming to welcome his older sister home. Raising an eyebrow, she asked if he thought he was so special that his family did not matter to him. She mentioned she had heard about the sword dance, and that the Night Academy was buzzing with rumors about him, adding that their father must be very proud. Aster brushed off the praise, insisting that she was the truly impressive one. Even as an apprentice, she had distinguished herself in numerous missions. He continued praising her, saying he had heard she was the only knight to receive the Medal of Honor that year. Kudo responded indifferently that if she could not accomplish at least that much, she would never be able to inherit their father's position. Then she fixed him with a steady gaze and asked directly whether he had rejected the offer to become heir out of consideration for her. Aster sighed, muttering how troublesome it was that their father had told her, and explained that he simply did not feel qualified yet. Kudo lowered her eyes thoughtfully for a moment. Then she turned and began walking away, complaining bitterly that both their father and Aster were cruel, knowing full well that it was her dream, yet still offering the inheritance to him. Her figure gradually disappeared among the trees, leaving Aster bewildered by her sudden change in mood. Without warning, she spun around and unleashed a powerful slash of blue energy straight at him. The attack sliced a tree clean in half as if it were butter, forcing Aster to narrowly dodge. The severe trunk crashed to the ground beside him, making him leap back to avoid being crushed. Landing lightly, he demanded to know what she was doing all of a sudden. Standing within a blazing aura of power, Kudo declared with a challenging smile that after all this time, his older sister would finally test him. With a fierce grin and her sword resting on her shoulder, she warned him that now she would come at him for real. Panic flickered across Aster's face as he tried to stop her, pleading for her to wait and explaining that his sword was still incomplete. She answered coldly, asking whether he could offer that same excuse to an enemy on the battlefield. The word enemy echoed in Aster's mind, forcing him to grasp the seriousness of the situation. Taking up a combat stance, Kudo reminded him that a knight's creed was to always be ready for battle and warned that if he held back too much, she would crush him. Her first strike was so powerful that he barely managed to evade it. Realizing this was no joke, as he leapt backward to escape her relentless assaults, he understood that he was already struggling just to keep his own magic under control. But when he saw the genuine killing intent in his sister's eyes, he knew he had no choice. Out of sheer desperation, he unleashed the crimson power of Gran, as the red energy of his blade collided violently with the blue aura surrounding her. A terrifying thought crossed his mind. She truly intended to kill him. Their battle raged deeper into the forest, far from watchful eyes. From a distance, it looked as though lightning itself had descended among the trees. Burst of light flashing. Kudo clicked her tongue mid-swing, her blade cutting clean arcs through the air, her expression sharp and merciless. She told Aster that he was still as skilled with the sword as ever, admitting she had never expected him to keep pace with her after all the growth she had achieved at the Night Academy. Aster blocked her relentless strikes one after another. She twisted her stance with practiced precision and unleashed a crushing blow that hurled him backward. Coldly, she declared that his control over mana was pathetic. Aster slid across the ground, boots digging deep grooves into the soil. Yet he forced himself to remain standing. Looking up at her, he remarked that she was just as merciless as he remembered. His thoughts drifted unwillingly to the past. Kudo had always been like this, fierce, confrontational, unyielding. As the only man in the family with the formal right to inherit, and as the bearer of a seven-wing crest superior to anyone else in the household, he had always stood as a silent thorn in her existence. To her, everything about him was unfair. She had grown into a storm that challenged every perceived injustice, and if he were honest, she was his natural enemy. Suddenly she leapt high into the air. In a moment Aster saw her silhouette rise against the canopy. He knew what was coming. Her sword descended like judgment itself. The impact split the forest floor, a violent shockwave exploding outward. Standing over him, she declared he was unworthy of becoming the next head of the family. Elsewhere, in their father's chamber, Alphen stood by the window, anxiety clear in her voice as she asked if it was truly wise to let those to fight alone. She feared that recklessness between siblings could end in death. Their father answered calmly that Aster and Kudo were rivals, reckless perhaps, but not foolish enough to cross that final line. Though still uneasy, Alfin pressed further, asking why they had truly been summoned back from the Night Academy. She sensed it was not merely about succession. Their father opened a drawer and withdrew a sealed envelope bearing the insignia of the Elmheim main family. The sight stole her breath. He explained it was a summons. The elders who controlled the family's core wished to see their grandchild in person. When she quietly asked if it was truly that serious, he replied without hesitation that, at worst, they could lose Aster. Back in the forest, the battle showed no sign of slowing. Their blades collided in rapid succession, shockwaves pulsing through the trees like a heartbeat of destruction. Amid the exchange, Aster told Kudo to stop speaking nonsense. He reminded her he had already refused the position of successor. She knew that better than anyone. Irritation twisted her features as she raised her sword high, declaring that his refusal was precisely what she found unacceptable. Her blade crashed down with overwhelming force. Aster barely caught it in time, and the weight of the strike stunned him. It felt less like facing a swordsman and more like bracing against a troll, swinging a massive warhammer. She pressed harder, pouring even more strength into the blow. At the final second, Aster twisted his wrist and flipped his blade, redirecting her strike into the ground. He demanded sharply whether she would finally listen. She only smiled faintly and asked if he was already trying to run. In the next heartbeat, she released her full brute strength. Aster was sent flying sideways, smashing into a tree so violently that bark exploded behind him. He coughed blood, disbelief flashing in his eyes. Kudo looked down at him and declared that if all he could do was swing a sword, he was third-rate. Even those who relied solely on mana were merely second-rate. Only those who mastered both sword and mana together deserved to be called first-rate. She told him she was deeply disappointed. The difference in wing crest, she explained, directly reflected mana capacity. Even a single wing meant nearly triple the power. Though she bore 5 wings, and was technically inferior by default stages to his 7, he still avoided direct clashes of raw strength, choosing instead to hide behind refined technique. With a faint smile, she asked whether he truly lacked faith in himself, or whether he feared losing control again, like he had 3 years ago. Her words cut deeper than steel. Aster froze. The memory surfaced unbidden. Had he been afraid all along? Had he unconsciously sealed away his own power because of that incident? For the first time, he truly questioned himself. His gaze fell to his sword as he muttered whether that same suppression was why Sordran always felt unstable in his grasp. Kudo's expression hardened further. She told him he possessed everything she had ever wanted. If he intended to let those blessings rot through ignorance and arrogance, then he should hand them over to someone who understood their worth. She lunged, killing intent no longer restrained. This time, Aster did not retreat. He met her all-out strike head-on, their blades colliding with a thunderous roar that echoed across the forest. To her shock, she was forced back, her footing faltering as disbelief filled her eyes. She could hardly comprehend that he had deflected her full-powered attack. Aster offered a faint smile and thanked her. Because of her, he said, he had finally awakened. Then he surged forward at full speed. Kudo narrowed her eyes, confused by his reckless charge. Why would he attack before even stabilizing his blade? Was he out of mana? The thought seemed impossible. As he advanced, mana flooded into his sword in overwhelming torrents. The 7 wings upon his back concealed a vast, nearly inexhaustible reserve. He knew he could not yet control it with precision. So instead of forcing control, he abandoned restraint altogether. For a fleeting instant, he released his reliance on technique and poured every ounce of his mana into the pure motion of his strike. The blow descended with unstoppable force. Kudo raised her sword and blocked it cleanly, stabilizing herself at once. Yet even as she held firm, she could feel the difference. Something within Aster had truly changed. Kudo steadied herself after blocking his strike and let out a small, amused smile. She asked whether he had truly thought this through, or if this was just another one of his half-baked impulses. Aster met her eyes without wavering. There was no hesitation left in him now. He told her plainly that he had no intention of wasting the second life. This time, he would seize everything that had once slipped through his fingers. The power of the 7 wings, the sword Graham, even his place within the family. These were things he had desperately struggled for before, and never managed to claim. At the words second life, Kudo stiffened for the briefest instant. Shock flickered across her face, subtle but unmistakable. In that tiny opening, Aster moved. Mana surged violently into his blade as he closed the distance in a blink. He leapt high into the air, gathering every ounce of power he possessed. His sword poised to fall with absolute finality, and then he vanished. Kudo's eyes widened as she lost sight of him mid-air. But Aster had not disappeared. He had dropped low instead, compressing his mana even further, forcing it into a tighter, denser current. The pressure around him intensified as he poured everything into the blade. He declared openly that there would be no more restraint. Kudo felt the shift immediately. The air itself grew heavy. She understood at once that the fight was about to end. Aster brought his sword down with overwhelming force, the air screaming as it split beneath the descending arc of mana. Some time later, Kudo slowly opened her eyes not to the forest, but to the familiar ceiling of her own room. For a moment, she did not understand how she had gotten there. Sunlight filtered through parted curtains where her older sister, Malfa, stood quietly by the window. Malfa turned and calmly remarked that Kudo had taken quite a long time to wake up. Kudo pushed herself upright at once, her voice sharp as she demanded to know what had happened to the duel. What was the outcome? Malfa smiled gently and explained that Aster had carried her back himself. He had told everyone that Kudo had fallen asleep in the middle of the fight. According to him, the exhaustion from her journey back from the Night Academy had finally caught up with her, and she had simply lost consciousness. Kudo lowered her gaze to her sword in silence. That was not true. She remembered the final instant clearly. Aster's blade had stopped mere inches from her. She had felt the crushing pressure of his mana, enough to split her in two. And yet, just before the strike connected, he had dispersed the mana blade. Only the lingering shockwave had brushed against her body, enough to send her into unconsciousness. In that moment, she understood something simple and undeniable. No matter what he said, Aster would never kill his own sister. And yet, for a heartbeat, she had believed he might. A faint smile touched her lips. Younger than her, and yet he had grown into something infuriatingly formidable. What an unbearable little brother he had become. She rose abruptly, gripping her sword, and asked Malfa where Aster was. Her eyes sharpened as she declared she would not accept a duel that ended like that. The next time, they would begin again at full strength from the very start. Malfa's expression shifted slightly. She told Kudo that Aster had already left the castle. Kudo froze where she stood. Malfa explained that the main house had summoned him, and earlier that day he had departed alongside their father. Seeing the confusion on Kudo's face, she asked whether she truly had not known about the summons. Anger flared in Kudo's voice as she demanded why no one had told her. Meanwhile, a horse-drawn carriage rolled steadily along the forest road beyond the castle grounds. Inside, Aster sat across from his father in silence. His father explained that the one Aster was about to meet was among the old lords who secretly supported the Elmheim family, even though they had retired from public leadership. The former heads of both the main and branch families and the powerful elders beneath them still held overwhelming authority. They no longer stood in the spotlight, but they ruled quietly from the shadows. He added that those elders had never once shown the slightest interest in Aster. After his adoption, for them to summon him now was not a trivial matter. Aster listened calmly and replied that it was most likely connected to the sword dance assembly. He mentioned that he had heard the elders of Elmheim valued the family's honor above all else, above gold, above life itself. Anyone who stained that honor, he said, would be thrown into a beast cage's feed. His father stared at him in disbelief and demanded to know where he had heard such an outrageous story. Slightly flustered, Aster answered that he had heard it somewhere long ago. Then, more steadily, he said he was prepared for whatever awaited him, punishment or exile alike. After a brief silence, his father asked whether it truly did not trouble him to leave without saying goodbye to Kudo. Aster smiled faintly and said it was fine. Their departures had been scheduled around the same time anyway. It was better, he believed, if he was not around. Since Kudo disliked him, she would likely feel more at ease in his absence. He added that thanks to her, he had finally begun to understand how to properly wield the sword Graham. He could now draw out the power of the 7 wings more freely than before. With steady eyes, he told his father that whatever happened next, he should not come to rescue him. He was ready to survive on his own. His father opened his mouth, clearly about to scold him for such reckless words. But before he could speak, a voice rang out from outside the carriage, questioning why Aster was acting so dramatic when he was the youngest among them. Aster's eyes widened in shock. Clinging to the side of the moving carriage was Kudo herself. Her expression was sharp, stubborn, and unmistakably alive with challenge as she glared at him. Without hesitation, she climbed into the moving carriage, as if the journey ahead had always included her. Kudo climbed fully into the carriage without the slightest hesitation and immediately turned on Aster, her eyes blazing. She demanded to know why he had slipped away without saying a single word to his older sister. Her tone carried both anger and disbelief. She added that she had heard about the summons from the elders of the main house and honor, or perhaps a threat that neither she nor Malfa had ever once received. Hifried's voice cut in firmly, reminding her that she could not accompany them to the main house. The matter was too sensitive, too dangerous to involve her. But Kudo calmly took a seat beside Aster, her posture steady. She replied that she already understood the situation. She knew their father had called her and Malfa back from the Night Academy to guard the estate during his absence. She was not foolish enough to miss that implication. Still, her expression hardened as she added that a summons from the main house meant the situation was serious enough to demand extreme caution. Malfa herself had warned that there was a real possibility Aster might not return. Aster brushed it off with a calm smile, saying she was overthinking it. He claimed he was merely going to talk and would come back soon enough. Yet deep inside, he understood the truth. Whether he would return safely was far from certain. Kudo suddenly raised a finger and pointed it directly at him. She told him to listen carefully, bluntly, without softening her words. She admitted that she hated him. Aster blinked, caught off guard. But she did not hesitate. She hated that he was a man in a family where that alone granted him advantages. She hated that he bore 7 wings. She hated that he was always treated as someone special. She hated that he was stronger than his older sisters. She hated that he carried himself with maturity despite being the youngest. She hated every bit of it. Then, slowly, her voice softened. No matter how much she despised those unfair things, he was still family. No matter how strong he acted, no matter how composed he seemed, he was still her little brother. Rising to her feet, proud and unshaken, she ordered him to come back properly, so they could settle their duel again. This time, they would begin at full power from the start. A faint smile curved her lips as she added that she would not allow him to escape with such a cheap victory. And with that, she leapt from the moving carriage as effortlessly as she had climbed aboard. Aster quickly leaned out, startled, asking his father why she had gone through the trouble of coming all this way just for that. Hifrid watched her shrinking figure with a proud expression and replied that, to him, it sounded like a proper farewell. Aster's lips curved into a quiet smile. As he looked back, he saw Kudo standing on the road behind them, waiting boldly at the departing carriage. In his heart, he thanked her, and silently, with firm resolve, he made himself a promise no matter what awaited him at the main house, he would return. Then we are shown Viscount Hifrid and Aster, who have already arrived at the main residence of the Elmheim family. The moment they step onto the estate grounds, a guide team is there to receive them. Their captain greets them formally and says, "The Grand Elder is already waiting inside." Hearing this, Viscount Hifrid calmly replies, "There is no need for a guide. I know the way." However, the captain firmly refuses. "We cannot allow that. We have been strictly ordered to escort you both together." From the atmosphere alone, Aster can already tell that they were not summoned merely out of familial affection for a grandson. It doesn't feel like that kind of welcome. There is a certain tension in the air, something stiff and deliberate. And yet, as his eyes drift across the familiar surroundings, a faint sense of nostalgia washes over him. How nostalgic. It's been a while since I've been home. His gaze lingers quietly on the estate as memories surface, but he says nothing. With no other choice, they proceed inside alongside the guides. As they walk, Viscount Hifrid speaks in a low but serious tone. "I assume you understand, Aster. Don't get hot-headed, at least not today. No matter what is said to you." Aster listens, then answers without hesitation. "That depends on how the other side acts." His father exhales slightly and replies, "I am saying that the other side is the problem. Listen carefully. The person we are about to meet is..." Before he can finish, Aster, still looking elsewhere rather than at his father, interrupts casually. "Darius is nowhere to be seen." He continues in the same indifferent tone. "Well, since his dominant hand was crushed, a return is likely difficult for the time being." At that, Viscount Hifrid looks at him sharply and asks, "Are you even listening?" Aster, pulled back from his thoughts, Aster answers simply yes. Aster then adds calmly, "For today, I will be as silent as a clam, since sister told me to come back safely." By now, they have reached a massive door. It slowly begins to open, the heavy sound echoing through the corridor. As they step inside, the captain of the guards announces in a loud, formal voice, "Lord Hifrid and his son have arrived." Seated at the far end of the grand hall, an elderly figure speaks with a measured tone. "You've finally come. Has it been over 10 years?" Father and son move forward together. Another voice follows, slightly amused. My grandson, Hifrid." Viscount Hifrid immediately drops to his knees and bows deeply, lowering his head in full respect. "It has been a long time, sixth head. No, great grand elder." Aster, meanwhile, keeps his composure. As he feels the weight of the man's gaze upon him, a thought crosses his mind. That is the monster lurking in the shadows of Elmheim. The main house's sixth head, Zenith Elmheim. Around him sit the true heavyweights who stand beneath the Elmheim, named figures of immense authority and influence. Among them are a few faces Aster recognizes from the Sword Dance Festival. His eyes scan the hall briefly before he asks, almost casually, "Is Roderick not here?" There is a flicker of surprise in his expression, but before anyone else can respond, the sixth head speaks sharply. "That man is not here, brat. He is the head of the knights who directly serve the royalty." After all, the atmosphere in the room remains heavy, charged with authority and unspoken tension. At that moment, an overwhelming and terrifying aura begins to pour from the elder's body, thick and suffocating, pressing down on the entire hall like an invisible weight. His presence alone feels enough to dominate the room as he continues coldly. He has no time to busy himself with vulgar matters. "So, we old soldiers are being considerate and handling the administrative duties, Aster." Hearing this, Aster remains outwardly calm, but his thoughts move quietly beneath the surface. "I didn't care before, because in my previous life I never even had the chance to see them. But to gather this many executives without the current head present, for a retired man, he still throws around quite a lot of weight. The influence of the sixth head is undeniable. Even in retirement, his authority seems absolute." Viscount Hifrid finally speaks, his voice controlled but firm. "And what are these vulgar matters?" Zenith Elmheim, the sixth head, lets out a low laugh. "Ha ha. You have already guessed, haven't you?" His sharp eyes shift slightly toward Aster as he continues. I heard your pet dog made quite a mess at the sword dance festival. The insult hangs heavily in the air, deliberate and cutting. As the tension in the hall grows even thicker, Aster lowers his gaze for a brief moment, then looks forward again, his golden eyes steady and unshaken. As I thought, it's about that, he says to himself, already having anticipated this direction. Viscount Highfried responds calmly after hearing the accusation. If this is about that matter, the current head, Roderick settled it himself and closed the case. But the elder immediately dismisses that argument. That was merely a performance for the public, Zenitha Elmheim says coldly. It does not change the fact that the Elmheim reputation has been tarnished. Adopting a child of unknown origin was a mistake in itself. We would have overlooked it had he remained harmless, but his voice hardens, and the atmosphere grows heavier with every word. It is a different story if he bears his fangs at the main house. There is no choice but to banish him. At that instant, an overwhelming killing intent floods the hall, far more intense than before. The pressure is suffocating, bearing down mercilessly. Of course, the sixth head continues, his eyes fixed forward. You will not escape suitable punishment either, Lord Highfried. The threat is unmistakable, and the room falls into a tense, breathless silence. After hearing everything, Aster speaks up firmly. Wait, I did everything myself. Father has nothing to do with it. At that moment, Viscount Highfried says nothing. He does not stop his son, nor does he support him aloud. Seeing his father remain silent, Aster gradually steadies himself and falls quiet as well. Zenitha Elmheim watches the exchange with sharp, unreadable eyes before speaking again. As I thought, he lacks discipline. For a child to try and interrupt while adults are speaking. With that, the sixth head slowly rises from his seat. The movement alone shifts the atmosphere in the hall, making it feel even heavier. We lead 12,000 knights under our banner, he declares in a deep, commanding voice. We bear the signboard named Elmheim. However, the knights are not a monolith. There are countless individuals vigilantly aiming for that top seat. His gaze sweeps across the gathered executives and elders. Naturally, even in this very place, the meaning behind his words is unmistakable. Power within Elmheim is not stable, it is constantly contested. And in a hall filled with ambitious figures, even a small crack in reputation can become a weapon. Zenitha Elmheim steps forward once more and speaks in a measured, chilling tone. We only want peace of mind. Proof that you are not someone who will bring harm to Elmheim. With that, he gestures and a sword is presented toward Viscount Highfried. The blade itself radiates an overwhelming and violent aura, its energy spilling into the hall like a storm barely contained. Do you remember? The sixth head continues coldly. Even when you failed to protect your liege and dragged Elmheim's name through the mud, we had Roderick cut off that arm right here. As he releases an even heavier wave of killing intent, the pressure becomes almost suffocating. This time, he declares mercilessly, cut off that brat's head, and we will consider this matter closed. The words strike like a blade. Viscount Highfried does not hesitate. I refuse, he says firmly. If I must cut down my own child, I would gladly take my own life instead. His voice carries no fear, only absolute resolve. Hearing this, Aster could only whisper, Father, but no other words follow. He finds himself unable to speak further. The sixth head remains standing, his oppressive pressure still flooding the room, crushing and relentless. His expression does not soften. In that case, he says calmly, yet with terrifying finality, you should die. Your wife, your daughters, that brat there, everyone. The hall falls into a deathly silence as his threat hangs in the air like an executioner's blade poised to fall. As of today, the Viscount house is dissolved. The declaration falls like a final verdict. At once, numerous knights surge forward, moving to carry out the order. Steel flashes in the hall as they advance, surrounding Viscount Highfried with drawn swords, their killing intent fully unleashed. Seeing his father encircled by blades on all sides, Aster steps forward and raises his voice. Why are you so frightened, Grand Elder? Zenitha Elmheim narrows his eyes. What? Aster does not back down. His golden gaze remains steady as he continues, his tone sharp and fearless. If you are afraid of being bitten by a pet dog, then grown adults huddling together and trembling like this is unsightly. The hall grows still, shocked by his audacity. Banishment, execution, do whatever you like, Aster goes on. But if you intend to lay a hand on my family. As he speaks, he begins removing his shirt without hesitation. His father watches in silence, fully aware of what his son is about to reveal. Before turning back to face the elders, Aster speaks softly toward his father. I'm sorry. It seems I'm not very good at staying silent after all. A knight nearby stares in disbelief and blurts out. What is that? That wing emblem on his back. Aster stands tall, revealing the mark clearly. At that time, he declares, his voice echoing through the chamber. These 7 wings will become Elmheim's enemy. Think it over carefully. The threat is no longer hidden. It is direct, absolute, and impossible to ignore. Seeing this, one person says, impossible. Could that be? The 7 wings emblem? Another elder says, that's fake. For hundreds of years, that thing appearing on a human body has. The fat elder says, however, that crest is unmistakably. Seeing all of this unfold, Zenitha Elmheim steps forward, his voice sharp and heavy with meaning. Do you understand the meaning of what you are showing us right now? Do you truly understand? His words hang in the air, tense and pressing. Hearing this, Astor responds almost casually, though there's a strange confidence behind his tone. Isn't it obvious? The more wings there are, the more shocked people become. At that moment, the scene shifts to a blue-haired figure watching everything closely. Instead of panic, a quiet laugh escapes him. No, excuse me. Please, continue. His amusement contrasts sharply with the atmosphere. Meanwhile, another person nearby looks deeply unsettled, clearly disturbed by what they are witnessing. Observing everyone's reactions, Zenith speaks again, this time explaining with grave seriousness. To begin with, the wing emblem is an organ used to generate magical power, a power that spirits shared with humans long ago. By passing that power down from parent to child, humans were able to deepen and strengthen it over generations. However, there has never been anyone who reached 7 wings. His statement sends a ripple through the room. Astor's expression tightens slightly. Are you saying that I belong to the spirit clan? Zenith meets his gaze steadily. If your 7 wings are real, then perhaps, indeed. The tension thickens. At the same time, we see Viscount Highfried watching his son in stunned silence. The weight of the revelation is evident on his face. But Astor steps forward, unwavering. I am a child of the Viscount house, he declares firmly. At this point, my birth does not matter. His voice grows colder, sharper, filled with resolve. What I want to ask right now is whether or not you all have the determination to make an enemy of me. The air itself seems to freeze as his words echo, turning the revelation of 7 wings into something far more dangerous. A declaration of challenge. Continuing without the slightest hesitation, he speaks in a calm but calculating tone. Suppose I were to be driven out of Elmheim. There would most likely be many among the martial nobility who would gladly welcome the 7 wings. And if that were to happen, then for those of you who already live in fear of rebellion, it would become a far greater threat. His words are not loud, yet they strike with precision. Rather than casting me aside, you should want to keep me close at hand. A symbol that surpasses even Duke Roderick himself. The signboard known as the 7 wings. At that moment, there's not even the faintest trace of fear in his eyes. No doubt, no hesitation, only clarity. Hearing this, every member seated in that chamber grows visibly uneasy. The weight of his reasoning settles over them like a storm cloud. What he is suggesting is not merely personal survival, it is political leverage. A shift in power, a dangerous possibility that none of them can easily ignore. Meanwhile, inside his own mind, Astor thinks quietly to himself. Just as that old man said earlier, Elmheim is not a single united force. Cracks already exist beneath the surface. In fact, a rebellion will happen. A massive civil war that will swallow the entire country. He has seen that future once before. For the sake of his own survival and for the survival of the Viscount house, he knows he cannot remain passive. At the very least, right here and right now, I must determine who stands as an enemy and who can be an ally, even if it means taking risks. The resolve within him hardens. This is no longer just about 7 wings, nor about noble pride. It is about preparing for the inevitable storm that only he knows is coming. Hearing all of this, Zenith Elmheim responds with undisguised anger, his authority pressing down on the entire chamber. You think you possess that much worth? He demands sharply. There isn't even any proof that those 7 wings are real. His words are meant to crush the momentum. Astor is built, doubt, authority, intimidation. But instead of retreating, Astor smiles. If you believe they aren't real, he replies calmly, almost provokingly, then kill me quickly. The room falls silent. At that moment, he continues, it will become a war between me and all of you. Inside, however, his thoughts move carefully behind that fearless expression. Killing someone like me right now would be easy. But if Elmheim truly becomes serious about this, what will they choose to do? Will they take the bait? He is gambling, not recklessly, but deliberately. He knows they cannot act carelessly. Not when uncertainty surrounds the 7 wings. As tension tightens like a drawn bowstring, the blue-haired man suddenly rises to his feet, clapping his hands lightly as if amused by the entire exchange. The conversation seems to be going in circles. Grand Elder. Then, turning slightly toward the others, he proposes smoothly for now. How about we impose a trial on him? At this, the heavy-set elder stiffens in protest. Count Maze. What are you? But Count Maze interrupts without losing his relaxed composure. Because you want to see it, don't you? He says with a faint smile. The power of the 7 wings. His gaze sharpens slightly. It won't be too late to decide his fate after that. The air shifts once more. What began as an argument has now turned into something far more dangerous, a test that could either prove Astor's claim or seal his destruction. How about it? The blue-haired noble presses smoothly. This is the mansion of the world-renowned martial clan. Surely you can prepare one, or to suitable trials. Hearing that name, Astor's thoughts sharpen. Did he say Count Maze? There's no mistake. This man is an ally. The realization settles firmly in his mind. The timing of the suggestion, the direction of the conversation. It was a lifeline disguised as curiosity. After a long pause, Zenith Elmheim finally speaks. Very well. Follow me. His tone is cold, but controlled. Teaching a lesson to a grandson who does not know how to speak properly is also an old man's duty. With that, he turns and leads them away. They arrive before a heavy structure. This is the trial grounds. It's quite dark. Zenith begins to explain as they stand before the entrance. Beyond this darkness lies an underground bunker connected to the waterways. It was originally constructed as an evacuation shelter for emergencies. However, we are currently keeping a single magic beast there. He pauses deliberately. The trial is simple. Defeat that magic beast. That is all. The simplicity of the words only makes the challenge feel heavier. Upon hearing this, Viscount Highfried sighs deeply, unable to hide his frustration. Good grief. He was such a troublesome child, always crying and screaming. And yet, I told you so many times to keep the existence of the 7 wings hidden. There is disappointment in his voice, but also worry. Aster listens silently. Then, without arguing further, he steps forward and places his hand on the door. I can't keep something so conspicuous hidden forever, he says calmly as he pushes it open. This was the perfect opportunity. The heavy door creaks as darkness spills outward, thick and cold. Whatever waits inside is not just a beast. It is proof, and Aster walks toward it without hesitation. Hearing his son's determination, Viscount Highfried calls out to him one last time, his voice carrying both authority and concern. Don't let your guard down, okay? Aster answers without hesitation. I'm off. With that, he turns and briefly looks toward the blue-haired noble. Count Maze is smiling quietly, as if observing everything with calm interest. That faint smile lingers in Aster's mind as he begins his descent. As he steps into the underground bunker, darkness surrounds him. The air is damp and heavy, the silence thick. It is undeniably dark, yet not so dark that he cannot see. And then he notices it, a severed head lying on the ground. Even in the dim light, the sight is unmistakable. At that moment, a voice echoes down from above, cold and detached. I even gave that one a chance to clear his name, though he just cried and screamed until the very end. It was unbearable to watch. They are speaking about Duke Roderick's son, the very head lying before him. The voice continues, carrying a faint warning. Don't disappoint me now. The meaning is clear. This is not merely a test. It is judgment. Suddenly, the ground seems to tremble. A massive presence emerges from the darkness. In front of Aster, a gigantic and terrifyingly powerful beast stands there. Its roar shaking the entire underground chamber. The sound is so fierce that it feels as though the walls themselves might crack under the pressure. Aster tightens his grip on his sword. The blade gleams faintly in the darkness. Above, the declaration comes once more, firm and merciless. Now then, let the trial begin. After that, we see Aster, who is thinking to himself, so the rumor was true. That Elmheim keeps a magic beast inside their mansion. Just this once. I actually feel bad for you, Darius, being born into this house full of monsters. At the same time, we are also shown his hand lying low to the ground. In that very moment, the magic beast unleashes an incredibly powerful roar that shakes the surroundings. Hearing it, Aster calmly prepares himself and says, but still. The instant those words leave his mouth, Aster suddenly bursts forward with astonishing speed. In a single flash, he dashes past the magic beast, moving so fast that it's almost impossible to follow with the eyes. The moment he crosses it, the magic beast body is instantly sliced apart, breaking into multiple pieces. Watching this unbelievable sight from above, everyone present is left completely stunned. After landing, Aster quietly hides his true thoughts and casually says, to me, Sister Kudo is way scarier than this. However, just then something shocking happens behind him. The broken pieces of the magic beast body suddenly begin to move, slowly pulling themselves back together. Piece by piece, the creature starts regenerating right before his eyes. The moment Aster notices this, his expression immediately fills with disbelief. Completely shocked, he mutters, what is this? No way. This thing isn't undead. And sure enough, the monster that had just been cut into pieces is now standing right in front of him again, as if nothing had happened. Without wasting a second, the creature unleashes another terrifying roar. Meanwhile, from above, a panicked voice suddenly echoes through the area. Viscount Highfried shouts in shock. An undead? Why is something like that under the mansion? After witnessing that terrifying power, the scene shifts to the other side where Zenith Elmheim stands watching everything unfold. A dark and sinister smile slowly spreads across his face as he calmly says, those things are drawn to the smell of death. It just showed up down there thinking it would find plenty of fresh corpses to eat. No matter how many times we cut it or burned it, the creature simply wouldn't die. In the end, we captured it and decided to keep it as the perfect opponent for testing someone's strength. He continues speaking in the same cold tone. Thanks to that, we don't have trouble getting rid of bodies anymore. Hearing those words, the fat elder standing nearby looks shocked and immediately responds. Even skilled knights can barely manage to capture an undead, and you're telling him to kill it. Are you really planning to let the 7 Wings boy die for nothing? After hearing this concern, Zenith Elmheim simply smiles even more coldly and replies, without the slightest hesitation, if that happens, it will only prove that he was nothing more than a braggart. A wing crest without power isn't even worthy of being called a decoration. From above, everyone is still silently watching the situation unfolding below. Zenith then continues speaking with complete indifference. Don't fret. Even if he dies, there are still ways we can make use of it. In fact, for us, that might be even more convenient. The moment those chilling words leave his mouth, everyone around him falls completely silent. For a brief moment, no one says anything at all, as the cold and ruthless meaning behind his words sinks heavily into the air. Amid all of this, the blue-haired boy watches the scene unfold while silently thinking to himself, after all that big talk he just gave, don't you dare die easily on me, Aster. After that, our attention returns to the fierce battle between Aster and the magical beast. From their clash, waves of incredibly powerful energy are being released, spreading through the entire area as the fight continues. In the middle of the battle, Aster keeps analyzing the situation in his mind. As he continues attacking the creature again and again, he thinks, no matter how many times I cut it, there's no real impact at all. And compared to a normal undead, this regeneration is insane. He continues thinking while carefully observing the monster's movements. Undead are already dead to begin with. Despite all these problems, Aster still stands his ground firmly in front of the beast, refusing to back down as he continues fighting it head-on. While facing the creature, he calmly reminds himself, to fully kill one, you have to burn it in sunlight, or purify it with a holy weapon. If you can't do either, then the standard tactic against undead is simple, don't engage. However, he immediately rejects that option in his mind. But obviously, retreat isn't an option here. Then, with determination growing stronger in his eyes, he continues thinking, and if I just use basic textbook tactics, then there's no point in being 7 wings. Even while facing a nearly immortal enemy, Aster remains standing without hesitation, ready to find his own way to defeat the monster. Aster clenches his resolve and declares to himself, I have to prove my worth. With that determination burning inside him, he suddenly swings his weapon forward, unleashing a powerful strike toward the front. The attack carries overwhelming force, and as he releases it, he shouts, by overpowering an undead with sheer strength. In the very next moment, an enormous explosion erupts from the clash. A massive and powerful blast shakes the entire area, sending dust and shockwaves spreading in every direction. The people watching from above are immediately stunned by the sheer amount of power released. One of the elders stammers in disbelief. What incredible magic power. Meanwhile, the other elders stare down at the battlefield with wide eyes and say in amazement, so this is the power of the 7 wings. Another voice quickly follows, filled with urgency and curiosity. What's happening down there? Did he defeat it? Throughout all of this, Zenith Elmheim continues watching the scene calmly and silently. Unlike the others, he shows almost no reaction at all. Then, as the dust from the massive explosion slowly begins to clear, the figure standing at the center of the battlefield is finally revealed. It is Aster, completely unharmed and still standing firmly on his feet. Seeing this outcome, Zenith Elmheim quietly mutters with clear disappointment, what a waste. But before anyone can fully process what just happened, the magical beast suddenly launches another attack toward Aster without warning. The creature moves so abruptly that Aster himself doesn't even realize when it happened. In the blink of an eye, he finds himself directly beneath the monster. Towering over him, the beast lets out a deafening and terrifying roar, its horrifying face looming right above him. Watching this terrifying moment from above, Viscount Highfried suddenly shouts in panic, calling out Aster's name at the top of his lungs. Seeing the situation unfold like this, the blue-haired boy suddenly speaks up, saying, please don't ruin this by jumping in to save him, Lord Highfried. Hearing those words, Viscount Highfried turns toward him with clear anger and shouts back, you want us to just stand by and watch him die? Seeing how furious he has become, the blue-haired boy calmly raises his voice to stop him and says, now, calm down. Then, while keeping his eyes fixed on the battlefield below, he continues, you should take another look down there. Seems like he still has a trump card left. After hearing this, everyone's attention immediately shifts back down to the battlefield. There, they see Aster, who is in an extremely bad condition after the attack. Despite his injuries, he is still standing, and even more surprisingly, he is smiling. Looking at the results of the battle so far, Aster quietly mutters, good, looks like it's working properly. It's a bit slimmer than before. With those words, he slowly raises his sword and points it directly toward the monster standing before him. From his posture alone, it becomes clear what he is about to do. In the very next moment, an overwhelming surge of energy bursts out from his sword and shoots upward like a blazing pillar of power. The energy is unbelievably intense, so powerful that it instantly overwhelms the monster in front of him. In just a single attack, the terrifying creature is completely destroyed. As the power erupts forward, Aster shouts loudly with fierce determination, this will continue until you die. After that, as everyone witnesses the demonstration of this destructive power, Viscount Highfried is left completely stunned. Watching the overwhelming attack unfold before his eyes, he begins thinking to himself, that's the move I showed him once. Memories start flashing through his mind as he recalls the technique he had once demonstrated. But as he continues watching the terrifying energy being unleashed below, he slowly realizes something isn't quite the same. After observing it more carefully, he corrects himself in disbelief. No, it's something different, something else entirely. Meanwhile, the energy released from Aster's attack is still raging violently across the battlefield. The power is so intense and terrifying that even the elders standing above can clearly feel its pressure. The entire area begins trembling under the force of the attack. One of the elders suddenly shouts in alarm, "Hey, this place is going to collapse too." Another elder quickly calls out to the others in urgency, "Elder lords, this way." Panic begins spreading among them as the destructive power threatens to bring everything down. But in the middle of all that chaos, one person remains completely calm, Zenith Elmheim, standing there quietly while observing everything. He finally speaks in his cold, composed voice and says, "So this is the power of the 7 wings." Seeing everything that had just happened, the yellow-haired man looked completely stunned. His eyes widened as he tried to understand the situation unfolding before him. With a shaken voice, he exclaimed, "What the hell happened?" It was clear from his expression that he was deeply alarmed. Still struggling to process what he had just witnessed, he quickly added, "And what happened to the magic beast?" Standing nearby and observing the entire scene was Zenith Elmheim. He had watched everything carefully, without missing a single detail. Looking at the aftermath of the battle, he calmly spoke as he analyzed what had occurred. Dragged the undead inside a whirl of magical power and torn it to pieces. His words carried a tone of quiet astonishment. After saying this, Zenith fell into thought for a brief moment. In his mind, he began evaluating what he had just seen. It wasn't even a technique, he thought to himself. Just simple brute force based purely on the quality and quantity of magical power, as would be expected of someone who possesses the 7 wings. Then, turning his gaze toward Viscount Highfried, Zenith asked in a calm but curious tone, "Was that something you planned to?" Hearing this question, Viscount Highfried shook his head slightly and replied honestly, "No, sir. Even I'm surprised by how much my son has grown." There was both pride and genuine surprise in his voice, as though even he had not expected such overwhelming power. Just then, from behind them, the blue-haired man spoke up. Looking toward Zenith, he asked respectfully, "Then, Honorable Elder, have you accepted the test?" After hearing the question, Zenith Elmheim looked around at the others present. Seeing no sign of disagreement on anyone's face, he answered calmly, "I don't think anyone here will have any objections." Upon hearing this decision, the blue-haired man immediately looked upward and shouted loudly toward the figure above, "Did you hear that, Aster? You passed? It would be good if you came up soon." From above, Aster's voice soon responded. However, there was a small problem. With a slightly awkward tone, he explained, "It seems the chain I came down with a moment ago was also destroyed in the attacks. Could you lower a rope?" After all of that, the scene slowly shifts to a quiet room. Inside, we see Zenith Elmheim sitting calmly, his expression composed as if he had already made up his mind about something important. Looking toward Aster, he speaks in a steady voice, "That's okay, isn't it? If you let this opportunity pass, there won't be a second one." His words carried a sense of finality, as though this moment was a turning point that would not come again. Hearing this, Aster answered without hesitation. His voice was calm but firm. "Yes, I have no interest in disputing the succession of the main family. If someone like me were loitering around the mansion, my cousins wouldn't rest easy either. After all, my place is at the Highfrieds." His response sounded straightforward and humble, as if he had already accepted his role and position in the world. But the moment Zenith Elmheim heard the words of this young boy, he suddenly began to laugh softly. The laugh was not mocking, but rather filled with amusement, as if he could see through something hidden beneath Aster's calm words. Smiling slightly, he said, "And you think that sounds humble? Do you think you can hide the ambition reflected in your eyes?" His gaze sharpened as he continued, studying Aster carefully. Do you plan to point your sword at Elmheim in the future? Is your goal Roderick's head?" Hearing such a direct question, Aster looked momentarily confused. The accusation had come so suddenly that he didn't immediately know how to respond. Seeing this reaction, Zenith laughed again, waving the tension away with a casual tone. "Don't get so defensive. I don't need to speak into your thoughts for now, Aster." After listening to all of this, Aster finally spoke again. Unable to hide his curiosity any longer, looking straight at Zenith, he asked, "Why? Aren't the rebels your enemies?" Hearing the boy's question, Zenith Elmheim looked at him with a far more serious expression than before. The faint amusement that had been in his voice disappeared, replaced by a calm but heavy tone as he replied, "I already told you we're not a united bloc either. That Roderick has too strong a character. If your existence serves as a restraining force for him, then that's fine too." His gaze then sharpened slightly, and the atmosphere in the room grew tense. "But if you ever show me your fangs, you know what will happen, right?" The warning was clear. It wasn't a threat spoken loudly, yet the weight behind those words made their meaning unmistakable. Hearing this, Aster remained silent for a moment. Outwardly, he kept a calm expression, but inside his mind a very different thought crossed his head. You damn old monster of Elmheim, he thought bitterly. Just then, the door of the room opened and Viscount Highfried stepped inside. Looking toward Aster, he asked in a straightforward tone, Aster, are you finished talking? What did he say to you? Aster turned toward him and answered calmly. He said he wanted to take me into the main family, but I refused. The moment Viscount Highfried heard this, his eyes widened in disbelief. What? He exclaimed in surprise, clearly not expecting such an answer. At the same time, another voice suddenly spoke from nearby. What a waste. If you officially came under the main family, you could have earned much greater profits than you have now. The one who had said this was the blue-haired man. Hearing his voice, Aster looked toward him carefully before speaking. You are Count Maze, aren't you? Why did Luna make a proposal earlier that seemed to help me? After hearing this question, the blue-haired man looked slightly puzzled before replying casually. What are you talking about? I just felt a little annoyance towards some brat who seemed arrogant. Then he stepped closer and placed a hand on Aster's shoulder in a friendly yet confident manner. But leaving that aside, from today you have become, both in name and in reality, a son who possesses the 7 wings. With those words, he gestured around them and said, Look around you. As Aster looked around the area, he began to notice the expressions of the other people present. Though many of them remained silent, their thoughts were clearly reflected in their eyes. Some of them were staring at him with fascination and desire, while others watched with calculation. In their minds, many of them were thinking the same thing. So that's what the 7 wings are. A few among them couldn't help but feel greedy at the sight. I want it. That power must definitely end up in my hands. Others were far more cautious, their thoughts turning darker. No. Before it becomes an obstacle, we should remove it. After all, he's still just a child. There are always ways to use someone like him. The atmosphere around Aster quietly filled with hidden intentions, ambitions, and schemes. Noticing the reactions of the people around them, the blue-haired man Count Maze spoke again to Aster in a calm voice. As you yourself said, the emblem of the 7 wings already has enormous name value on its own. From now on, in many ways, the number of people who try to recruit you will increase. Hearing this, Aster looked directly at him and asked bluntly, Are you one of them too, Count Maze? For a brief moment, the blue-haired man seemed slightly surprised by the question. However, he quickly regained his usual composure and replied, Although it may not seem like it, I am a member of the board of the Knights Academy. Listening to this, Aster quietly observed him. In his mind, he thought to himself, He's a rather strange man. Perhaps it's still too soon to consider him an ally. Just then, Viscount Highfried stepped closer and gently placed a hand on Aster's shoulder. With a satisfied expression, he said, All right then, we should leave as well. You still have to tell your sisters about the great performance you gave today. Hearing this, Aster nodded slightly and replied, Yes, father. Although if my mother sees these wounds, she surely faint. After that, the scene shifts once again, this time to the inside of another noble residence. The atmosphere there is far calmer, yet the conversation taking place carries a serious tone. A knight stands respectfully while delivering a report. Captain of the Knights. It is reported that young Darius died during the test set by Sir Zenith the other day. Hearing this, the man seated before him quietly responded, I see. The one speaking was none other than Roderick. After a brief pause, he continued calmly, I also heard that Highfried's son was summoned by the elders of the main family. What happened to him? The knight hesitated for a moment. In his mind, a thought crossed silently. Doesn't he even care about his own son? Despite the thought, he maintained his composure and answered respectfully, Yes, I have something to report about that as well. Before the knight could continue, Duke Roderick spoke again, as if he had already guessed the answer. Just as I thought, that boy also had the 7 wings. The knight looked surprised and immediately asked, Did you already know? Roderick leaned back slightly as he spoke, his tone calm but thoughtful. If it continues like this, the balance of power that has been maintained for so long within Elmheim could collapse. The knight then asked carefully, Shouldn't we take some action? However, Roderick simply dismissed the concern with a slight wave of his hand. Leave it. If Elmheim were to struggle over an obstacle of this level, it would have gone extinct long ago. Then, a faint smile appeared on his face as he added, Besides, although I'm not in a hurry, sooner or later those wings will be mine. His eyes darkened slightly as he continued. Until then, I'll let him have fun freely. Let's see how long the baby who escaped that day can endure. I'll be entertained with this for a while. Child of the 7 wings, Aster. As he said those words, the anger and hostility on his face were clearly visible. The scene then changes once more. For years later, a loud voice echoes across a large open area filled with people. Dorsil Knights Academy entrance exam applicants, register this way. Once finished, move on quickly to the next point. The place is crowded, with young candidates who have come to take the Academy's entrance exam. Among them, a muscular soldier notices someone in the distance and nudges the person next to him. Hey, isn't that the famous? The other man quickly shakes his head and replies, It can't be. I heard he was a much more corpulent guy. Meanwhile, at the registration desk, another official pushes forward a document and says firmly, Neither the kingdom nor the knights order will be held liable for injury or accidents during the examination. If you agree, sign here. After that, present your wing emblem. He then continues while reviewing the candidates. We can't miss someone without magic power. Very well then, the emblem of the wings of Aster and Elmheim. But the moment he is about to say the name properly, his tongue suddenly stumbles. He looks up toward the person standing in front of him, clearly startled. The young man standing there tilts his head slightly and asked calmly, "Did he say to present the emblem? Mine is in a somewhat difficult place to display. Can I just use my face?" The one standing there with a relaxed smile was none other than Aster. After that, the scene shifts to a grand hall, where a large crowd has gathered outside. Among them, we finally see our protagonist, slowly walking forward with calm confidence. From behind, someone keeps calling out to him repeatedly. A man dressed in green steps forward, his gaze sharp and mocking as he points at him and says, "Aster, you, the smug-looking guy right there. I've never seen your face before. I don't know which noble house or country you're from, but this man's name is Vigor Smeets." With a sneer, he continues, "Didn't you come to the wrong place?" He spreads his arms slightly, as if presenting the place itself. "This is for the elite of the elites among knights. This is the selection exam venue for the glorious Kingdom Knight cadets. You know." Unfazed by his words, calmly replies, "Then there's no problem." Vigor freezes for a moment, clearly taken aback. Then, raising his voice, he says, "Hey, wait a second. Everyone here has gone through strict and grueling hardship, and even after all that, they still dream of walking the glorious path of the elite, taking this exam again and again." His eyes drop to Aster's weapon, and he lets out a mocking laugh. "And you, carrying a child-sized sword on your hip. Everyone here can see it. This isn't a place for a fledgling swordsman like you. Come on, if you're just here to sightsee, go home, go home." His voice echoes slightly, drawing attention from those nearby. A few people in the crowd whisper among themselves. "He's at it again," one man mutters. "Smeets, the new guy bully." Another person beside him sighs. "He never gets tired of this every year, huh?" Then his expression shifts as he looks more closely at Aster. More importantly, the guy he's messing with. "Isn't he the Elmheim from the rumors?" A third voice joins in, filled with quiet awe. "You mean Astor of the Seven Wings?" Hearing this, Vigor Smeets' expression stiffens. In his mind, the words echo Seven Wings. Before he can react further, someone else steps forward, his tone suddenly light yet filled with a strange familiarity. "Oh my. I was wondering who it was," the newcomer says with a faint smile. "And if it isn't Cousin Aster?" At those words, Aster's calm expression finally shifts. He turns his gaze sharply toward the speaker, eyes narrowing slightly as he recognizes him. Gurion. Seeing Aster, his cousin Gurion smiles faintly and steps closer, his tone casual yet edged with something deeper. "It's been a while, cousin. Since no one seems to know when or where you were born, I've taken the liberty of calling you cousin." Astor listens quietly, his expression unreadable. Then, without hesitation, he replies, "It's a shame about Darius." For a brief moment, there is silence, but Gurion's smile doesn't fade. Instead, it sharpens. "No, don't worry about it," he says lightly. "A disgrace like him deserved to die. Honestly, I feel refreshed now that he's gone. Just because he was 1 year older. He was always so bossy, always throwing his weight around. He was a nuisance to me too." His eyes narrow slightly as he looks directly at Aster, the friendliness in his voice turning cold. "I don't know if you're Seven Wings or whatever, but you'd better not underestimate the people of the main house." With that, Gurion turns his back, beginning to walk away. As he leaves, he glances over his shoulder, giving Aster a chilling, almost sinister look. "Because here, there's no one left to protect you." The tension lingers in the air even after he's gone. Nearby, one of the onlookers exhales in disbelief. "Two people from Elmheim? The examinees this term have rotten luck." Another man beside him mutters. "The main house and the branch house are still at each other's throats, right?" A third quickly adds, clearly uneasy, "I don't want to get dragged into this." Meanwhile, Vigor Smeets, who had been so loud and arrogant just moments ago, now looks completely shaken. His confidence crumbles as realization dawns on him. "Wait, are you?" "No, perhaps. Or rather, without a doubt. Are you the Elmheim?" Aster gives a small, calm smile as if none of this matters to him. "Just Aster is fine, senior." With that, the scene shifts to the first exam venue. A large gathering of candidates stands assembled, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. At the front, an examiner steps forward, his voice loud and authoritative as it echoes across the area. "Gentlemen, well done on making it here." He begins. "First, I want to express my gratitude for your courage and patriotism. We Kingdom Knights are unlike those provincial knights infesting the countryside." He pauses briefly, letting his words sink in before continuing with pride. "We serve the king." The examiner's voice rises even louder. filled with pride and intensity as he continues, "We protect the king. We are the glorious swords, who risk our lives to fight for the king. We have no need for dull and blunt swords. Treat today's exam as a battlefield day and show us your true worth to the fullest." As those powerful words echo across the venue, Aster watches silently. Then, in his mind, he mutters, "What he's saying is ridiculous," but his gaze steadies, and a quiet determination takes hold within him. "I've finally made it back here. The path to becoming a kingdom knight. A right I wasn't even granted back when I was wingless." For a moment, memories seemed to pass through his mind of a time when he stood outside this very path, unable to step forward. But now, things are different. Beyond this lies a world of the strong, a world I could never reach before. His eyes sharpen as a single figure comes to mind, and the man still ruling at its apex is him. Kingdom Knight General Commander Roderick A. Elmheim. A faint, confident resolve forms within him. "Wait right there, Roderick. I'll catch up to you in no time." His thoughts turn firm, focused. To do that first, I have to pass this selection exam. Just then, the examiner's voice cuts through the air once again, pulling everyone back to reality. "Now then, let's get started. The first exam is this." Before he can even finish properly, a sharp whistling sound slices through the air. In the very next instant, an arrow strikes one of the candidates straight in the head, and the man collapses to the ground without warning. For a split second, silence falls. Then chaos begins to ripple through the crowd as shock spreads across every face. A voice resounds again, cold and unwavering. "First exam trial of the Arrow Tower." The declaration sends a chill through everyone present. "The last one standing among you will be the winner." Panic and confusion break out instantly. Some candidates look around frantically, trying to understand what's happening. "What are we supposed to do about this?" One of them shouts, his voice filled with disbelief and fear. Another candidate suddenly shouts at the top of his lungs, panic clear in his voice, "Run. We'll be killed if we stay here. Group up. Watch each other's backs and block the arrows." His words snap many out of their shock, and several of them begin moving together, raising their weapons and trying desperately to defend against the relentless rain of arrows. Chaos spreads across the field as people scramble to survive, forming small groups and attempting to shield one another from the deadly assault pouring down from above. From high above, the examiner stands calmly, watching everything unfold with a cold, calculating gaze. There is no urgency in his expression, only quiet observation. "As expected," he says, his voice carrying easily over the noise below. "The veterans from previous exams know what they're doing." He pauses briefly, his eyes scanning the struggling candidates before continuing. "But even doing that, the survival rate is only about 30%. Such superficial countermeasures will quickly reach their limit." Almost as if to prove his point, another candidate is struck by an arrow and collapses to the ground, adding to the growing tension and fear among the remaining participants. The examiner's tone remains steady, almost indifferent. "What we want to see is..." At that moment, the focus shifts slightly as a white-haired individual comes into view. Unlike the others, he moves with ease and precision, effortlessly deflecting the incoming arrows as if they pose no real threat to him. His movements are sharp, controlled, and almost flawless, drawing attention even amidst the chaos. Watching this, the examiner's eyes narrow with interest as he finishes his sentence. "The overwhelming, problem-solving ability that only those with a wing emblem can achieve." Meanwhile, in stark contrast to the panic and frantic movement around him, Aster remains exactly where he is, standing completely still, unmoving, as if the storm of arrows doesn't concern him at all. Noticing this, one of the candidates nearby looks at him in disbelief and shouts, "Why is that idiot just standing there? Did he faint from fear?" Seeing him like that, his cousin thinks to himself with a cold smile, "Huh? Just die and turn into a hedgehog like that?" But in the next moment, everything changes. Aster calmly pulls out his small sword, the same one everyone was making fun of. The instant he draws it, a powerful energy bursts out from him. The force is so strong that the arrows coming toward him don't even reach him. They are destroyed in midair, as if erased by his presence alone. Everyone around him is left completely shocked, unable to believe what they just saw. One person says in disbelief, He deflected all the arrows." Aster stands there calmly with a slight smile on his face and says, "Bring them all to me." We see Aster standing there, his body still releasing an incredibly powerful energy. Every weapon directed toward him is being completely deflected, unable to even come close because of the overwhelming force surrounding him. Witnessing this, one of the people nearby exclaims in shock, "What kind of monster is this guy? Not even an arrow can get near him." Even the examiner, watching closely, is stunned. He mutters in disbelief. Is he spinning the magic he released to create air currents? What impressive magical control. At the same time, we see Aster lost in his own thoughts. He quietly reflects, "It's like I'm enveloped in a storm. The Energy radiating from him is so intense and terrifying that the people around him are visibly affected, struggling just to withstand its presence. After a moment, someone hesitantly asks, "Did it stop? Is it over?" From above, the examiner observes the aftermath and calmly announces, "It seems quite a few survived, more than expected, but it doesn't matter. Congratulations, participants. Look around you at the corpses surrounding you. Those still standing right now are the ones who have passed the first test. On to the next test. No time to lose. Follow me, I'll guide you to the location of the next test." Everyone listens carefully to his words, the weight of what just happened sinking in. Meanwhile, Vigor Smeets, having witnessed everything, remarks with a mix of fear and awe, "What a terrifying instructor. They were shooting us with a non-stop rain of arrows." Aster simply smiles and responds casually, "What's wrong? Are you exhausted already, Major?" The man turns back toward him, confused and slightly shaken, and asks, "Why don't you look tired at all?" Everything that was happening below was being carefully observed by the examiner from above. Watching Aster, he thought to himself in amazement. He unleashed so much magic, and yet shows no signs of fatigue. Then, with a serious and commanding tone in his mind, he continued, "Aster F. Elmheim, bearer of the 7 wings, show us your courage in the following test." At some distance, Gurion was also watching Aster closely. As he stared at him, a memory surfaced in his mind, someone speaking to him in a firm and deliberate voice. "You understand well, don't you, Gurion? You must prevent him from becoming a knight of the realm at all cost, for the future of Elmheim." Recalling those words, Gurion's expression darkened, and anger began to rise within him. Soon after, the scene shifted outside. As everyone gathered for the next stage, an inspector stepped forward and announced, "In the next test, to ensure equality, everyone will use the same sword. Before the test, everyone must submit their own swords." Hearing this, one of the participants complained, "This is annoying." Aster, who had been listening quietly, turned slightly and asked, "Was it different before?" Vigor Smeets responded, explaining, "No, the swords we middle-class knights have aren't that different, but that sword of yours is probably just shocking." Other knights nearby also overheard this conversation. Aster glanced down at his own sword and simply said, "I see." At that moment, Gurion approached them and spoke with a smug tone. "As expected from my cousin, it seems he has already tamed his servants." Aster paid him no attention at all, completely ignoring his presence. Meanwhile, Vigor Smeets, clearly irritated, fired back, "What do you mean servant? Who are you calling a servant? You are the heir to Baron Smite's house, aren't you?" Gurion looked at him with disdain and continued to insult him even further. "A low-ranking noble from some unknown village. If you choose the wrong person to wag your tail at, you might end up regretting it." Despite everything, Vigor Smeets immediately switched his tone and began flattering him, saying, "Wait a moment, young Master Gurion. I have absolutely nothing to do with this shot, Aster." Aster was standing just behind them, watching everything unfold. Yet he chose to remain silent, not saying a single word. Shortly after, Gurion turned away and left the area along with his team. Vigor Smeets quickly followed after him. On the other side, the examiner raised his voice and began addressing everyone loudly. "Gentlemen, now I will explain the second trial." His commanding presence drew everyone's attention as he continued. "The second trial will be a mock battle of attack and defense. You will be divided into 3 teams and will compete for bases within this forest. A base will be considered captured when you raise your team's flag on the flagpole at that base." He paused briefly before continuing. "The team that captures 2 or more bases before the sunset bell rings will be declared the winner. It is strictly forbidden to destroy or steal the flags or render them unusable. Apart from that, there are no further restrictions." Then, in a colder tone, he added, "The swords that have been given to you, you may consider them as a permit to kill the enemy if necessary." After explaining all the rules, he stepped forward and said, "Now, I will announce the teammates with whom you will face this test." He then began distributing the participants into 3 groups. The first leader was Gurion. The second was the white-haired participant we had seen during the first test, someone who had performed exceptionally well, and the third was Aster. Each of them stood at the head of their respective teams, ready for the upcoming battle. As everything was set, Aster stood within his designated area and calmly analyzed the situation, saying, "The start signal will be when the smoke signal is raised. There are 3 flags, 1 for each faction. To win, a team must capture 2 or more bases, including their own." At the same time, Vigor Smeets, who had ended up in Aster's team either by coincidence or pure chance, spoke up with a serious expression. "That means, out of the 3 teams, only one will pass the test, right?" Aster calmly listened and replied, "Yes, but is that something to worry about?" Another participant, clearly uneasy, added, "That means we'll have to fight Elmheim, doesn't it?" A third person hesitated before speaking. "That's a little." While hearing their anxious voices, Aster began to think quietly to himself, trying to understand their hesitation. But before he could say anything, Vigor Smeets suddenly raised his voice, his fear now fully visible. "Don't you understand? We're scared. Scared of going against Elmheim. Our rival is the young master of the main house of Elmheim. We will probably never be able to call ourselves knights with pride. In the worst case, they could exterminate our entire family and followers. For that reason, no one wants to have them as enemies. After hearing all of this, Aster picked up the blue flag in his hand and asked in a straightforward tone, "So, will they abandon the test?" Vigorous Meats responded without hesitation. "There will always be another chance. It's better than ruining our lives forever. You will not be able to understand us. What we, the weakest, feel." As those words sank in, Aster suddenly began to run, his thoughts racing. "I never imagined I would be isolated in a team battle, but I understand them," he thought to himself. "I had forgotten. But for the knights. Elmheim is a tyrannical family they can never oppose. Gurion is the symbol of that regime of terror." Even as he moved forward, the words of his teammates continued to echo in his mind. "You will not be able to understand us. What we, the weakest, feel." Thinking over everything his teammates had said, Aster quietly muttered to himself, looking at it another way. "I'm no different from them. Even so, it's too quiet. Has no one started fighting?" Moving swiftly through the forest, he headed straight toward the red flag. As he advanced at high speed, a thought crossed his mind. Or are they just being cautious? Just then, from a distance, a voice called out, "Oh, wow. So you really came alone?" Aster stopped and looked ahead. It was the white-haired participant, the same one who had stood out during the first test. The man continued calmly. "So far, everything has turned out just as he predicted." He held his flag firmly in his hand. Seeing him there, Aster thought to himself, is that why he stayed under the flag of his own base? The white-haired man looked directly at Aster and said casually, "I was just getting bored with nothing to do." Then, without hesitation, he suddenly tossed his yellow flag up into the air and declared boldly, "Fight me, Aster." Aster was completely caught off guard, his mind racing in confusion. What does this mean? He wondered. At the same time, the man tightened his grip on his sword, the atmosphere instantly turning tense as the moment of battle drew near. The scene then shifted elsewhere. On another front, we see Gurion advancing with his entire team, moving forward with confidence and determination. With a cold resolve, he declared, "I'll prove it to you, cousin." How the Elmheim family fights. After that, we are told about the second test of the Knights of the Realm Selection Exam, which is an attack and defense battle, and with that the fight has already begun. The 20 participants are divided into 3 groups, and the rule is explained clearly that the team which occupies 2 or more bases by the end of the exam will be declared the winner. In other words, the goal to pass the exam is to raise your team flag at the enemy base. In the middle of the battle, Aster steps forward and asks something directly. He says that the opponent must surely be on the yellow team, so why is he raising the red flag at that moment? The white-haired person calmly replies that the reason is simple, because an alliance has been formed between Elmheim and him. As he says this, he begins to release the energy of his sword, and the atmosphere immediately becomes intense and heavy. Right then, a mysterious observer appears and explains who this person really is. He is revealed to be the eldest son of the Nolan family, a family famous as the founders of court fencing. His name is Christopher Nolan. He carries the 5-winged emblem. In the first test, he was overshadowed by the 7-winged participant and did not stand out much, but during the arrow tower test, only 2 people managed to pass without even changing their expressions, and those 2 were the 7-winged Aster and the 5-winged Nolan. The observer then adds that both of them are outstanding talents from Caballero and possess incredible potential, but it is truly unfortunate that such promising individuals have ended up facing each other in this situation. After hearing him speak about the alliance, Aster immediately questions him, asking if it is a moon alliance and whether he truly understands that even if they do something like that, only one team can ultimately win. Christopher listens calmly, and while blocking Aster's attack, he answers that he is fully aware of it, and that since Elmheim is on their side, he has already decided that the main house will be the one to win. He continues by explaining that at this very moment his teammates should already be together with Elmheim and heading to attack Aster base. Hearing this, Aster feels a sudden sense of danger rising within him and thinks that this is bad, because Smite and the others are now in serious danger. He then confronts Christopher again, asking if Gurion threatened him by saying something like what would happen if he dared to oppose Elmheim. Christopher moves forward without hesitation and replies that no one would willingly stand in the path of a moving carriage when they already know they will be crushed beneath it. He explains further that the chivalric nobility exist within a strict hierarchical society, and such actions are simply part of its natural order. As he speaks, he releases a powerful attack filled with overwhelming force and declares that this, too, is the natural conduct expected of nobles. Aster struggles to block the strike, and even while defending himself, he begins to feel the pressure growing beyond his control. In the next instant, his sword suddenly breaks under the force, and as he looks at the shattered blade, he realizes something is wrong and thinks to himself that the sword is definitely strange. At that moment, Aster begins to think to himself that could it be possible that they were given a defective sword for this exam. The doubt lingers in his mind as he tries to understand what just happened, but on the other side, Christopher has not finished yet. He continues to push forward with force and confidently declares that there is no need to worry because their fight will remain nothing more than a gentleman duel from the very beginning. He adds that he does not like the people of Elmheim, especially those who try to stand out like Aster, and calls them centennials with a tone filled with disdain. By now Christopher has already shattered Aster's sword in a brutal manner and keeps attacking without giving him any time to recover. Aster is left struggling in the middle of all these overwhelming situations, but in the very next moment he quickly regains his composure. He grabs the broken piece of his sword and channels his energy into it, unleashing that power forward in a sudden strike. The attack shoots ahead with great force straight toward Christopher, catching him slightly off guard. Christopher manages to block it, but not without difficulty, and in that brief moment of distraction he notices something unexpected. Aster has already turned and started running away. Surprised by the sudden move, Christopher calls out, loudly asking if he is really running away, and tells him to wait. Aster, however, does not stop, and while moving away he turns back just enough to say that their fight will happen later because right now there is someone else with whom he needs to settle a score. His voice remains calm as he speaks about his cousin, making it clear that this decision is not out of fear but intention. Hearing this, Christopher lets out a smile and mocks him, asking if he was scared and saying that he does not even deserve to be called a gentleman. After that, Christopher picks up the broken sword that had fallen to the ground and examines it closely. He questions what kind of sword it is and remarks that even if it is cheap, it lacks far too much quality, clearly realizing that something about it is unusual and far from normal. Seeing all of this, Christopher pauses for a moment and lightly runs his hand through his hair as if he has finally understood something. He quietly says that he sees now and realizes that this is Elmheim work. With a slightly irritated expression, he adds that it is quite an unpleasant way to ruin the atmosphere, showing clear annoyance at how things have been manipulated behind the scenes. On the other side, Aster returns to his territory and immediately calls out, asking Smite if he is alright. But before he can get any answer, a familiar voice reaches him saying that he arrived sooner than expected. Cousin standing, there is none other than Girion, the one behind this entire plan. Everything that has been happening inside this exam has been carefully arranged by him. He calmly continues, saying that from what he can see, Nolan did not even manage to stop Aster. Around them, everyone is already prepared for battle, ready to strike at any moment. Girion keeps speaking and reminds Aster of his earlier words that he alone would be enough, and because of that he had high expectations. He then casually asks how things are going on Aster's side before revealing that they have already secured the third base. As Aster looks around, he can clearly see the red flag raised over the base, marking it as Girion team territory. Girion then declares that this is just the beginning and that complete conquest will come next. Hearing all of this fills Aster with anger and frustration. He lashes out at Girion with harsh words before demanding to know what happened to his classmates. Girion's expression darkens slightly after hearing Aster's tone, and he begins to respond, but suddenly something unexpected happens. From behind him, a person appears and points a sword directly at him. That person is Vigor Smeets, who nervously speaks up, telling Aster not to misunderstand the situation. At this point, it becomes clear that betrayal has taken place even within Aster's own team. Vigor continues explaining that from the very beginning he had already told Girion that he would not go along with his plans, making it evident that not everyone had willingly participated in this scheme, even though the damage had already been done. Vigor Smeets still seems confused as he speaks, saying that those who oppose Elmheim are cowards, yet his voice lacks certainty, as if he is struggling to fully accept those words. Girion then steps in and continues with a cold confidence, saying that they did not even show any signs of resistance, even though they were nothing more than field monkeys, and that it seems they at least had enough sense to understand which side of Elmheim they should support. Hearing all of this, Aster becomes furious and challenges him directly, asking if he really thinks he can defeat him just by gathering more people. Girion simply smiles in response and calmly tells him that he is wrong and that the battle is already decided. He then explains the true victory condition of the attack and defense battle, saying that the team which secures 2 or more bases by the end of the exam will win. And even if Aster falls into despair now and starts raising flags at every base, he still would not have enough people to defend them. As Aster looks around, he can see that the blue flag has already been destroyed, making the situation even worse. Girion continues revealing his plans, saying that they only need to wait for Aster to move to another base and raise the red flag again, and all they have to do is maintain control over 2 or more bases. His smile only grows wider as he explains how simple and effective this strategy is. But instead of backing down, Aster responds with firm determination, declaring that if that is their plan, then he will make Sure, they are not even able to do that, setting the stage for an intense clash that is about to unfold. After that, we see Aster's determination clearly as he declares that he will continue until everyone is torn to pieces. Hearing these words, everyone around begins to tremble in fear, but Gurion simply smiles after hearing him and mocks him by saying that such talk is nonsense. He points at Aster's sword and says that it is not even useful, adding that even if Aster has 7 wings, without a moon sword he is nothing but useless. At the same time, Gurion continues to reveal his plans one by one, showing that everything has been carefully arranged by him. He then challenges Aster, asking if he really wants to try fighting against everyone present. After hearing this, Aster calmly responds that this situation is quite troublesome and admits that Gurion has impressed him. He draws his sword, but once again the broken blade can be seen and even makes one of the people watching feel uneasy. Aster then says that Gurion has thought everything out more than he expected, and suddenly he lets his sword fall to the ground. Seeing this, Gurion immediately declares that they have already won, but at the very moment Aster's sword drops, he prepares himself once again, and as we look at him we can see the determination burning in his eyes, making it clear that he has not given up at all. After everything that had just happened, Aster suddenly said, "I give up. I'm impressed. Gurion, you've planned this much better than I thought." Hearing this, Gurion felt extremely satisfied, almost pleased with himself. But in the very next moment, as Aster's sword slipped and fell downward, he released a surge of energy, bending slightly. In an instant, he struck backward with incredible force, sending Vigor's Meats flying far into the distance. The impact was so powerful that Vigor's sword slipped out of his hand and fell away. Seizing the opportunity, Aster picked up that sword as well and unleashed a devastating attack both in front of him and behind him. Everyone present in that area collapsed from just that single overwhelming strike. Watching all of this from above, Gurion could only shout in shock. "What?" Aster then pointed his sword straight at him and said coldly, "But still, you made a mistake by standing in front of me. For meddling, now you're going to lose." At that moment, we see Aster in an incredibly cool and intimidating stance. Seeing him like that, Gurion growled, "You damn monster." Meanwhile, an immense amount of energy began gathering around Aster's feet. In the blink of an eye, he moved, closing the distance instantly. Aster was in midair, yet he was rushing toward Gurion at an unbelievable speed, ready to strike. Gurion, startled, glanced back and exclaimed in disbelief, "Impossible. Did he fly all the way here?" Looking straight at him, Aster said coldly, "You're too slow. Now you won't be able to escape." In the very next instant, he launched a direct attack at Gurion. Gurion tried to block it with his sword, but the force behind Aster's strike was overwhelming. His blade shattered on impact. At that very moment, Aster thought to himself, "I remember the day I flew for the first time. It's probably not because I couldn't before. It's because now I can feel it, that feeling of omnipotence when manipulating magic." Closing the distance, Aster came right up to Gurion and said, "Having wings is great. Look, that wall was so big." Gurion tried to respond, but before he could even finish, Aster interrupted him, dragging him downward as he continued, "But for me, it was small." A faint smile appeared on Aster's face as he said this, and in the very next second, they both came crashing down. A massive explosion shook the area as they hit the ground, leaving everyone watching in complete shock. Seeing this, Vigor's Meats muttered in disbelief, "What kind of fight is that? What happened to those two?" The others standing nearby were just as stunned, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Through the thick dust rising from the impact, a figure could be seen dragging someone across the ground. It was hard to make out who it was at first because of the dust, but as the figure came closer, it became clear it was Aster. He was dragging Gurion, having completely defeated him. Gurion didn't even try to fight back anymore, as if he had already given up. Aster threw him down roughly and said, "It hurts." Then, turning toward the others, he shouted with irritation, "All of you, what are you doing just standing there, watching like idiots?" Even now, the situation was completely under his control. Raising his voice once again, he ordered everyone, "Hurry up and kill this one. That's an order of the Elmheim family." At those words, Vigor's Meats immediately rushed forward toward his fallen sword. On the other side, Aster looked at him calmly and said, "Are you that afraid of Elmheim's retaliation?" Gripping his sword tightly, Vigor's Meats, filled with anger, replied, "Of course. The Smite family I come from is nothing more than a third-rate noble house, one that could disappear in an instant if Elmheim sets his mind to it. They would crush us like we're nothing, so that weak nobles like us can survive in this world. However cowardly it may seem, we have no choice but to act submissively and avoid angering those above us." Then, shouting even louder in frustration, he added, "Someone like you, who possesses everything, wouldn't understand our concerns." Hearing this, Aster simply smiled. Seeing him laugh like that only made Vigor angrier, and he snapped, "What are you laughing at now?" Aster answered calmly, "My sister told me something similar a while ago. You don't understand the feelings of those who have nothing. I do have my own objections to that, but it's true that right now, I'm someone with privilege. That's why. There are things only I can do. As Aster said this, Gurion lay beneath his sword, watching everything with burning anger. Then Aster, raising his voice with intensity, declared, "My enemy is Elmheim. If you can't do it, then I will. I'll change that arrogant and overpowered Elmheim of today. I'll tear it down and rebuild it." Hearing these words, everyone around fell into stunned silence. They were completely shaken, unable to believe what they had just heard. Both his bold thoughts and the sheer weight of his declaration. Gurion, still lying on the ground, muttered in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Vigor Smeets, equally shaken, looked at Aster and said, "Do you even understand what you're saying? What it truly means?" Aster met his gaze without hesitation and replied, "Yes. It's a declaration of war." He continued, his voice steady but powerful. "No matter how obedient and devoted they are to the current arrogant Elmheim, what awaits them at the end of that loyalty is nothing but betrayal and a miserable death. If they don't want that fate, then there's only one path left: to fight." Then, slightly shifting his stance, he added, "These 7 wings I carry on my back, they are the power meant for that very purpose. So now, you choose." His eyes swept across everyone present as he asked, "Which Elmheim will you follow? Him or me?" In that moment, Aster had placed a choice right in front of them all. It was no longer just a battle, it had become a turning point. After all, Gurion was the only heir of the main family, and choosing a side now meant deciding the future itself. Furious and shouting at the top of his voice, Gurion glared at Aster and yelled, "Don't talk nonsense. There's no way something like that is allowed. I remember your faces and your names. Dare to betray me, and you know exactly what will happen to you." Hearing those words, Vigor Smeets began to panic. Sweat formed on his face as fear and uncertainty took over. He couldn't decide which side to choose, what was right for him, for his family. The pressure of that choice weighed heavily on him. But then, as if making up his mind in a single moment, he suddenly threw his sword down and stepped forward. Looking straight at Aster, he said, "You're really going to defeat him, right? If you're just eluding us, and nothing changes afterward, then I will repudiate you." At that moment, he was also holding the blue flag in his hand. After hearing his words, Aster gave him his promise without hesitation. And with that, Vigor Smeets immediately raised the blue flag high into the air and declared loudly, "Vigor Smite, eldest son of the Smite house, I will support Aster F. Elmheim." Hearing this, one of the onlookers said in disbelief, "It can't be. He really said it." Another added, "But with this, Gurion's plan will fall apart." As those words spread, the anger in Gurion's eyes became unmistakable, burning with rage. Staring ahead with pure fury, he spat out, "This damn peasant." After all that, Vigor Smeets finally stepped forward, his voice booming loudly across the area as he shouted, "What are you all just standing around for? Now's our chance to show those arrogant Elmheim snobs what we're made of. Let's bet it all on the 7 wings." His words sounded powerful and inspiring, the kind that could stir anyone's blood, but instead of immediate action, the others only looked at each other in confusion, unsure of what they were actually supposed to do next. The energy was there, but direction was missing. Watching everything unfold, Aster quietly thought to himself, "That's one down. At least I won't have to go around raising flags all by myself now. But it's still not enough. I need more allies if I'm going to overthrow Elmheim." His expression remained calm, but his mind was already moving several steps ahead, calculating what he still lacked. Not far away, Gurion sat silently, his presence heavy with tension. Suddenly, someone approached him with concern and asked, "Are you alright, Gurion?" But before the person could get any closer, Gurion roughly shoved him back and snapped, "Don't touch me, you useless trash." At that moment, his anger had clearly reached its peak. Inside his mind, his thoughts burned with frustration and pride. Overthrow Elmheim? You branch family scum. If I let him keep doing whatever he wants, I won't be able to face the main family. I'm not like my brother, I can't let this end here. Driven by that rage, Gurion began trying to activate the power of his 4 wings. The air around him grew tense, as if something dangerous was about to erupt. But just then, a voice came from behind him, casual yet sharp, cutting through the atmosphere. "What's wrong, Elmheim? You're looking pretty pathetic for someone I haven't seen in a while." Gurion's eyes narrowed as he turned back, instantly recognizing the speaker. "Nolan," he said, his tone heavy. And just like that, Christopher Nolan had arrived. As Gurion quickly explained the situation to him, his frustration became even more apparent. "What have you been doing all this time? Dealing with him was supposed to be your job." But even as he spoke, a dark, calculating thought crept into his mind, twisting his expression into something almost sinister. "Perfect. I still have him on my side. His wing badge might not match the 7 wings, but when it comes to swordsmanship, he's definitely stronger than anyone else here." With that thought, Gurion's confidence surged again. Raising his voice, rough and filled with authority, he shouted, "Hurry up and hack that guy to pieces." But in the very next moment, something completely unexpected happened, something no one there had even imagined. Christopher suddenly stepped forward and slammed a red flag straight into Gurion's face before calmly saying, "I came to return this. Just as I thought. Your methods go against my chivalry. In other words, I'm breaking our alliance." Those words hit harder than any blade. Gurion, already shaken, was left stunned on the ground, unable to process what had just happened. Around him, murmurs of disbelief spread quickly. One member from a smaller family blurted out in shock, "You've got to be kidding me. Even the Nolan family is betraying us." Another person standing behind him added anxiously, "I don't even know who to side with anymore." The situation had completely fallen into chaos. Alliances were breaking, trust was crumbling, and no one knew what would happen next. Amid all of this, Christopher calmly drew his sword, the sharp sound cutting through the tension as he spoke with steady confidence. "Well then, looks like we're back to square one. You didn't really think you'd get through this exam without settling things with me, did you?" Aster, who had been watching and listening to everything closely, remained silent but fully alert. Christopher, however, wasn't done yet. With pride evident in his stance, he continued, "The proud swordsmanship of my Nolan family versus your 7 wings." Taking a firm sword stance, his presence became sharp and focused. The air itself seemed to tighten as both Aster and Christopher stood face to face. Their eyes locked onto each other, and then, in an instant, the fight began. Christopher moved first, charging forward with incredible speed, his blade cutting through the air as he launched his attack. His voice rang out with intensity and determination. "Let's finally make it clear. Which one is superior?" Christopher's attack carried overwhelming power, the force behind it so intense that the air itself seemed to tremble. The moment Aster witnessed it, something within him responded. Energy began to surge out from his body, rising like a tide he could no longer hold back. With a firm voice, he declared, "No, that's going to have to wait." In the next instant, he moved, launching his own attack straight toward Christopher. Even so, it was clear that Aster wasn't fighting at his absolute peak. Using an ordinary sword meant he couldn't properly channel the full power of his 7 wings. Saying that he was going all out here wouldn't be accurate. He was holding back, yet still managing to stand his ground against someone of Christopher's level. Christopher, however, immediately noticed the difference. As their blades clashed, his sharp eyes analyzed Aster's movements, and he muttered to himself that this person was completely different from before. In that moment, his sword was forced down toward the ground. Aster's strike had landed heavily, leaving a deep mark along the blade. Recovering quickly, Christopher looked up and said, "Wait, have you forgotten?" With incredible speed, he jumped back, creating distance between them before continuing. "Only one team can pass this exam. If we're both aiming to become Kingdom Knights, then we have no choice but to settle this right here, right now, Aster." Aster's expression didn't waver. Instead, he calmly replied, "That would be a problem for me, Nolan." For a brief moment, the tension shifted, and then Aster said something no one expected. "I want you to become a Kingdom Knight too." Christopher blinked in surprise. "What?" Aster lowered his stance slightly and began to explain, his tone steady but sincere. "You got everyone fired up about overthrowing Elmheim, so it wouldn't be very cool of me to ask you to give up on your dream, just because we're on different teams, would it?" There was a pause just long enough for his words to sink in before he added, "I have a plan to make sure everyone here passes." This time, it wasn't just Christopher who was shocked. Gurion was equally stunned, unable to hide his reaction. Then the murmur spread through the rest of the group. Vigor Smeets was the first to voice what everyone else was thinking. "Everyone, there's no way you can do that." Aster slowly lowered his sword, the tension in his posture easing just slightly as he answered, "I can't guarantee it, but I'm confident. But I need everyone's cooperation to pull it off." Saying this, Aster immediately stepped forward toward Gurion. Seeing him approach so directly, Gurion instinctively tensed up. There was clear fear in his eyes after everything that had just happened. But instead of attacking, Aster simply extended his hand toward him and said calmly, "So first things first, let's make up, Gurion." That single gesture carried more weight than any strike. For a moment, the battlefield once filled with hostility felt uncertain, as if everything was about to change. Then, the scene shifted completely. Now, all the flags could be seen gathered together, merged and tied in a single long line, neatly arranged across the camps. It was an unusual sight, something no one would normally expect in an exam like this. When the examiner arrived and saw it, his reaction was immediate. His face twisted with anger as he shouted, "What is the meaning of this? Do you people not even know how to raise a flag?" Amid the tension, Aster stepped forward and replied in a calm, almost quiet tone, "The condition for victory is occupying 2 or more camps. But since we were never told that only one team could raise their flag at a single camp, we decided to form an alliance between our 3 teams and jointly occupy all the camps." His explanation was clear and logical, but it wasn't something the examiner was willing to accept so easily. Instead, his anger only grew stronger as he snapped back. "So, you want me to pass all of you? Are you making a mockery of this exam?" Standing nearby, Vigor Smeets could already feel the tension tightening around them. His entire body stiffened as he muttered, "I knew it wouldn't work." Beside him, Gurion also shook his head, unable to believe this approach would succeed. Of course it didn't. There's no way that kind of twisted logic would fly. Meanwhile, the examiner's focus remained locked on Aster. His expression hardened as he stepped closer, his voice cutting sharply through the air. If you were ordered to attack and destroy an enemy territory, would you just shake hands with the enemy and come back? The question wasn't just criticism, it was a direct challenge to Aster's way of thinking, forcing him to justify not only his plan, but his ideals as well. Aster met the examiner's gaze without hesitation and answered calmly. If that enemy had more value alive than dead, the reply only seemed to irritate the examiner further. His expression hardened as he declared firmly, a knight is the sword of the state. It is not your place to make that judgment, Aster. But Aster didn't back down. Instead, he stepped forward slightly and said, then, are you going to disqualify us? But since we haven't broken any rules, wouldn't that decision be your own ego overstepping the bounds of an examiner? Those words hit differently. For a moment, even the examiner seemed caught off guard, unable to respond immediately. Aster didn't stop there. He moved a little closer and added in a quieter, more deliberate tone, besides, if everyone were to fail in this manner, I wonder if the main family would really stay quiet about it. That statement shifted everything. The tension in the air changed, and the examiner's reaction was no longer just anger, it was hesitation. Soon after, the entire scene transitioned. Now, everyone was gathered in a different area waiting. Vigor Smeet sat in front of Aster, clearly restless, and said, and so, the great examiner went to check with his superiors, and we've been on standby for a full hour now. Are we really going to be okay? Don't tell me we're actually all going to fail. Aster, however, remained unusually relaxed. In a light tone, he replied, who knows? At the very least, we showed them it's worth discussing. Not far away, the others lingered around Gurion, still uncertain about everything that had happened. Lowering his voice, Vigor added, still, I'm surprised that little rich boy actually agreed to cooperate. What exactly did you say to him? Aster simply shrugged it off. Nothing much. Just then, a loud voice cut through the area of attention. Instantly, everyone's focus snapped forward. The examiner stood before them, his presence commanding as ever, and announced in a loud, clear voice, Principal Mimir will now announce the exam results. Listen closely, all of you.